No. That's okay.
I have more of these long ones.
I
Okay.
did pull this
So
out.
you'll be with Carrie.
There's stories on there.
That's specific to that question.
Expand the group.
It's not as if
We're now live.
Elsie's immune to.
Goodness, all right.
Dapper.
Okay, we have
Mind your P's and Q's.
Mind your P's and
Yeah, see what this got. Yeah.
voice in here. Thank you for being here. I know it's a night away from your baby.
Okay, I ran home, fed him dinner and did all that.
Oh my gosh.
And my mother-in-law showed up, so.
Oh gosh, crazy trip.
Oh, it's okay.
Sharon was sitting. So we can sit here.
Oh, no, okay, thank you.
Oh, it's the screen. There you
Okay,
go.
yeah, so then I'll do that.
I just read a study that they said if you are able to turn your video off on a Zoom call, it's better for mental health. They did like a proper study on it. Never. Just having that ability to turn it off. Pretty neat.
Doing it with an option.
I am good.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm gonna use that study to validate my, not this format, but every other format.
They called me a son and I'm like, I might not see this, but I'll see.
Okay. All right, we will go ahead and call this special work session to order for USD 348 Board of Education. At this time, I'd ask that everyone stand to say the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'm just trying to
All
see.
right, board members, may I have an approval of the agenda, please?
So moved.
And second?
Second.
Chris seconded, Phil moved, and Chris seconded that we approve the agenda as presented. All those in favor, please say aye. Raise your right hand.
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0. All right, before we begin our special work session tonight, since we have kind of a roundtable approach, what we'll do is we'll go around. We can start, actually, let's start with Susan since she's a board member. Go ahead, even if you are a board member, introduce yourself. And then if you're not a board member, we want you to introduce as well. And then describe your role here in the district so that for folks who are watching and viewing can understand who people are and what their role is tonight in our work session. Susan, if you wouldn't mind going ahead.
Hey, I'm Susan Schippebein.
And I'm Jana Craig here, and I'm the Director of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment.
I'm Carrie Stevens, I'm a board member. I'm Sydney Novotny, I'm the high school social worker.
Philip Harvey, board member.
I'm Dan Ray. I'm the director of the Central Kansas Cooperative in Education.
Deb Elin Gwynn, principal at Baldwin Primary Center.
Dan Wallsmith, Baldwin Intermediate Center principal.
Kelly Bethel Smith, board member.
Paul Dorothy, superintendent of schools.
Brant Berdingham, high school principal.
Derek Bland, junior high principal.
Chris Perry, board member.
Lisa Patrick, district nurse.
Tony Brown, board member.
I'm Sally Ryan, I'm from Burt Nash. I'm the program manager and I supervise your RAP therapist.
Andy Parks, board member.
Chad Brackeisen, assistant principal, high school.
Thanks, everybody. All right, as we dive in here, as you can see, we sort of laid out the agenda in a way that hopefully is sort of linear, the way we can build pieces on top of pieces. Obviously, there's a lot more to what everybody does on a day-to-day basis than what you see here. But we thought by developing sort of these categories, there's several things that can fall underneath the umbrella of each of those things. And in fact, some of those would even be overlapping in some cases. But hopefully that gives enough that we can approach this from that comprehensive level, but then have that more specific feedback from our specialists in those content areas to be able to really speak to those topics, what we are doing already and what more we might need to do. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Dorothy as we begin the conversation. Bullet point number 1 with the mitigation measures.
Okay, so the first thing we have on the agenda under the special work session is the mitigation measures for all of us to look at this. One thing I'd like to say, and make sure we've got a lot of people at the table here. If you have something to say or you need to jump in, feel like you could do that, most certainly the board will get to a point where they have a motion order, something that they feel like they're doing tonight. They will take care of that. But this is a discussion with all the right people at the table. So if a discussion is going along and you find something that you say, I want to have something to say about that, jump in and talk about it. Don't feel like, oh, I shouldn't say anything. You're here at this table for a reason so that you can bring in the information that you have. So with that, the first thing we have on the agenda are the mitigation measures. So basically, the several page document that we put together of the interventions at the beginning of the year. That tonight, we want to discuss parts of that. If there are parts on here that are concerns for anyone at the table, they should be brought up at this time. What we don't want to do is skip on down to 7 or 6 and then say, oh, I really want to talk about 1. If it's during 1's time, it needs to be talked about now, or as we move down the schedule, we leave it alone, especially since 1 probably affects most everything down the list. So it's important to bring up those things during this time. So with that, I guess it's open to those that have concerns or discussions you would like to talk about. I know there are some specific things on people's minds about the mitigation prevention measures and what we would like to do with them. So wherever somebody would like to start.
I'll jump in. So I have a little bit of concern about the very first thing in there. The first bullet point under vaccination says we as a school district strongly encourage people to get vaccinated. That's a little bit like us saying we would like somebody to be on Eliquis instead of warfarin for their blood thinner. I feel like what it should say is something along the lines of we would encourage everybody to talk with their doctor about whether the vaccine is correct for them or not, as opposed to us giving medical advice.
Feelings.
Well, I'll jump in. Why is that, Dr. Harvey? Do you have doubts that the vaccine actually works to help?
Well, no, but I don't think we're in a position as a board to get, I mean, there are certainly people out there that shouldn't get the vaccine. And I don't want to come across as saying that we think that everybody should. I just think that the wording should be, we strongly encourage you to talk with your doctor about getting the vaccine, as opposed to us saying, we think you should get the vaccine. Because I don't think we're in a position as a school district, as a school board, to dictate people's medical care, medical treatment.
Can we say we strongly encourage in consultation with your doctor to get the vaccine?
Yeah, that's basically what I'm saying. Yeah, and we strongly encourage you to consult with your doctor about getting the vaccine. I think I have no problem saying that.
Because I would, as a board, as a district, like to take a stance that we encourage the vaccine. There are exceptions. I acknowledge that. I'm not doubting that, right? But I think if we just say consult with your doctor, there's going to be ambiguity in that. And I think that we take a stand and sort of say, consult with your doctor, but we encourage you, if it is medically viable for you, that you ought to take the vaccine. And I don't think we're prescribing the vaccine for anybody. I mean, I like the idea of consulting with your doctor. I don't have opposition to that. But I don't want to say this is just an option that do it if you feel like it, don't do it if you feel like it. This is a matter of public health. And I think it's a good idea to do that. It's sort of like saying, take the smallpox vaccine if you want to, don't take it if you don't want to. I mean, there's at least one vaccine that has been fully approved by the FDA. I think we can fall back on that and say, this has been documented to help prevent the spread of COVID. It doesn't mean that you aren't going to get it, but it's going to limit your exposure to it and perhaps your risk of serious illness or
Yeah, sure. I don't disagree with any of that. To me, I mean, that comes across as saying that, I mean, we're dispensing medical advice. And I don't think we should be.
It's an interesting point too, and I know we're not the only government entity to provide that recommendation. So, I mean, it would not be without precedent for cities and county governments and state governments and the federal government for also weighing in and encouraging folks to get vaccinated. But I see your point that it should certainly be done in consultation with the doctor. But I do believe our stance should be on par with the county, the state, the feds about recommending vaccination as best we can in the circumstances anyway.
I can get on board with wordsmithing it the way that you like it, the way that Tony presented it. I think it's kind of presumptuous to assume they wouldn't consult with their doctor if there was any concern, but I'd like to believe that people know themselves enough to know when they need to consult a physician.
Other thoughts? Since that affects those who are, at this time, the only student population that's viable for are those that are over 12. So for those of you who are working with over 12 students and their families, anything you'd like to add to that as far as the language part? Comfort level? I would be uncomfortable personally. I would be uncomfortable personally with removing language about vaccination, but I'll tell you why I actually really like consulting with your doctor about the vaccination. Because I think part of the quandary of school boards, not just school boards, but other entities everywhere, we have a county public health officer who's Dr. Marcelino. And if people disagree with that, there's a process by which you advocate for different people in that role who will then appoint a different medical officer, but he's our medical officer, sorry. And so, you know, if that's the recommendation, I think we have a duty to explain also what that recommendation is. But as what we've been saying all along, nobody ran for school board trying to be a doctor. Like no principal did, no teacher did. And I do think though, it would be a fair presumption that folks would consult with their doctors. And I think I hear what you're saying. You don't want it to sound condescending, but in this particular climate, the more clear we can be, I don't think that's a bad thing. Just something to think about. But again, for those of you who are working in that role with families who are 12 and over, if you have opinions about that, and you don't just have to have, I don't mean to exclude if you're 12 and under, because that might change too at some point, I don't know. But anything on that particular point from anyone else? So do we have a comfort level with that, or would we rather not? I guess.
Let me read what I have,
Thank you.
and then you guys tell me if that's getting it or not. USD 348 strongly encourages all staff and students eligible for the COVID-19 vaccine in consultation with your physician to be vaccinated prior to the start of the school year or as soon as possible. Want me to change that wording?
I'm okay with that.
I like that.
It's good with me.
Can we strike the prior to the school year part since we already crossed that bridge?
Oh,
Save a couple words, you know?
yeah, vaccinated as soon as possible.
Just leave it as this period after vaccinated.
Vaccinated.
Period after vaccinated?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. Is that where you guys want it? Is that good?
Sounds good.
Okay, I'm seeing yeses.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, Phil, did you have any others that you wanted to address at this time or?
Like on the whole sheet.
Okay,
I mean, I still don't understand the difference in close contacts and quarantining with the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated. And I know that came from, I think that came from the county. I just can't wrap my head around how why there's a difference. Because I mean, everybody is, I think it's pretty well known that when you're vaccinated and you get it, you're still shedding, you can still transmit it to anybody, whether they're vaccinated or unvaccinated. So I guess I can't wrap my head around why there's a difference. I don't know, maybe you have some insight that's more than I can think
No,
of.
I just think in our conversations, when I've met with the health department, it was just a matter of, when you are vaccinated, the chances are much less unless you're immunocompromised of being able to contract the virus, and then much less to be able to spread the virus as well.
Okay, I hadn't heard that. Okay.
Yeah, to me, this just seems to be playing the probabilities, right? People who are not vaccinated seem to be the ones that are contracting the virus at a much higher rate. They are the ones that are being hospitalized with the virus. They are the ones that are unfortunately dying from the virus. The vaccinated persons in our community seem to be the ones that have some level of protection, even though you're accurate, that you can still have these crossover cases. You can still shed the virus to others, but the probability of that is significantly lower. So is the vaccine perfect? No. Does it lessen the odds? Yes. And when we have limited availability of services in fighting this virus, we need to know where we can target it the best. So I think that just makes sense from a medical public health standpoint.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, one of the most recent things I saw was like, in Israel, highest percentage of COVID vaccination, like 90%, like 60% of the hospitalized cases were vaccinated people.
So, but think of the odds there, right? 90% of the people are vaccinated.
Mm-hmm.
The only place that the vaccine can go then are to vaccinated people, because so many people are vaccinated. The situation here is very different. We have a much lower vaccination rate. So if I'm a vaccine, if I can anthropomorphize this.
It's a hard word to say.
Yeah, it's a hard word to get out. But I think if I'm a vaccine, I'm going to the people that are unvaccinated, right? If I can target them, it's easier for me to infect them.
You're a virus.
Yeah, the virus, right. So if I'm a virus, I can target them, and they're easier to infect than the people that are vaccinated.
Right.
But if you have a high vaccination rate, it makes sense that the vaccinated people are going to be the folks that have the crossover. There's going to be a higher rate there. It's just a probability thing in those situations.
Totally get it. I mean, but when we've been going through this whole thing, it's like saying, even if it just helps a little bit, 1% reduction in stuff, we should be doing, like the masks, So I feel like if you've got somebody who's vaccinated and you can still shed it, even if it's a small percentage point, I feel like I still can't wrap my head around the idea of saying, well, even though it's a much less percentage or there's a less chance of it, it's still a chance. And even that's kind of the same argument that we've been using about saying people should be wearing masks. Well, there's not a lot of, there's anecdotal stuff and there's stuff that says, this will help a little bit and we need this layered protection.
Right.
But I feel like this is one more layer of protection that we could be using that we're not.
Except it's not a small percentage, right? 90% of the people that are contracting the virus currently are the unvaccinated persons in our society. It's only 10% of the people who have vaccinations that are having these crossover cases. So it's a 9-to-1 ratio. I don't think that's a small percentage difference, right? I think that's a huge difference. And I think in that case, it is helpful, just from a logical standpoint, to know whether a person has the vaccine as protection, because that gives us an indication of how serious this case might be, or how likely they are to shed it to other people, right?
To bring this conversation into our educational context, right? Because these are the kind of kitchen table conversations everybody's having right now, but to focus that in on how we do school. There isn't, it seems clear to me that there is viral shed even if one is vaccinated. I don't believe are a lot of studies yet, but I know they're in process about being not peer reviewed. So I'm not quoting studies because everybody's quoting a study. But what I feel better about, as a board, the whole reason why we went down this route is for a couple of reasons. We didn't want to create further division that's happening in our society among our kids. So that was kind of the reason of the mindset of not labeling vaccinated versus that, getting into those waters. At the same time, Nurse Lisa has to be able to answer to the county who is responsible for quarantining. We are not. Where I feel more comfortable with that personally, and I don't know how you guys feel, and I invite that for discussion. But though it may not make sense for the vaccinated person to not be quarantined, the person there, that's why we're doing the daily testing to keep kids in school. So there is sort of a way out of that. And I know people are upset about the testing part too, but the testing part is what keeps them in school versus you're just home for 10 days. So when I focus it in on, there's a lot of things, like I say, that any one of us would maybe design if we were just individually doing it. And there are a lot of things that, well, if we're doing this, why would we be doing that? I understand the philosophical part of what you're saying. But at some point we have to just pick, this is how we're doing it, as flawed and maybe even inconsistent, that we acknowledge that it is, because how can we do this to keep kids in school? So I guess that would be maybe what I would just add, and maybe that opens up some other ideas.
But
I'll speak.
I just want to make this, just make this point. The board is under no obligation to do a testing program. You don't have to. There is this grant through KDHE, and they say you can do this, and this is a test to learn so that you can stay in school. So most certainly we could drop this. If we drop it, we're basically back to anytime the county says a kid needs quarantine, the only choice is you're out 10 days. Not a wonderful choice. Really don't want to go back to that. Most certainly, if this can be tweaked, the issue has been, and Lisa can speak to this some, and it's improved a little bit in the last few days, but it's the amount of time it takes to do this. Now, I think we're still working on that. I think there's an opportunity. Some of it's been space, but I do think there's potential of another place in town where parents could take the kids, get their testing done, and then come to the school and drop off, so we're not battling for space at the school. So I just don't know how quickly that's going to come, but I think that's there. I also think we're getting some people involved, some more people that can help Lisa with the testing, which we didn't have enough to start with, and so we were getting overrun. So part of, and maybe Lisa can address this better than me. Phil, I get your point. I totally get it on trying to say let's not delineate, and the not delineate would be we test everybody if they're a close contact. My worry is that going to overrun us more? And if that's the way we got to do it, that's the way we got to do it. But then we might get a point of saying we can't do it. It's just a tough decision on it.
If you,
So I'll drop that. Go ahead.
since this, I was looking at Dr. Breck, I'm gonna see who's gonna break first as to who talks first. A couple things. One, in terms of delineating between the two, there's going to be, every day you walk in this building, there are groups and subgroups and so forth. I'm going to take the mental health waiver that will, if there was a mandate in which my building, and I know in other buildings, we have people that are now saying, well, he has asthma or a mental health issue. Okay, well, now you're delineating between two groups because this kid's going to walk in and you're not wearing a mask. So I know either you have asthma, you have a mental health issue. So now I'm starting to delineate there. And my biggest point, I think, is if we don't do some things, we are going to be right back to where we were 1 year ago. And what he and I and Lisa, what I don't want to do is that first time we get a positive case with a sports team, I never hear the end of it. And I don't know, maybe that's just waving a white flag and that's the coward thing to do. But I can't do another winter like we did last year. I can't do that. And so to me, if we're delineating between two groups, but quite frankly, no one should know who those two groups are except for Lisa. And then Lisa comes to me on a need to know basis. So I get it. I mean, I understand like, hey, this group's vaccinated and maybe they're getting something special. But the reality is that will also allow us to keep numbers down in terms of our testing if we think we can continue to do that for the course of the year. So I don't mean that to sound gruff. I feel like if we don't do some things.
Well, you've convinced,
like
you've
we're last
convinced me. I'm on.
You know what I mean?
I mean, couched in the argument of saying, hey, this allows us to, decrease our testing so that we can keep kids in school more. Then I'm okay with that.
I just think, and I think too, and I know there are students that did get the vaccine, right, wrong, or different, specifically for that fact, knowing I would have a way in which I wouldn't quarantine. I'm not going to argue like they can't pass the virus along to somebody else. But at least in that scenario, they know like, hey, I'm on the volleyball team. I know that if I am a close contact or, whatever the case, I can continue my volleyball season along with these other 6 girls. And we can still test and get those, versus testing 20. Now maybe we only have to test 8. And I know that's still, okay, well, these girls are, but no one really should know that. So from our standpoint, again, the last thing I would say, if we don't do some of those things, I just think we end up where we were a year ago. So
there is one more caveat. We had 147 on Acellus last year, and it was a grind every day. We're just about to 25 now, and it has sucked up almost every minute of every day that I've been on. And if you take that caveat away to be able to test or show their card and be in school, we are going to have an onslaught of kids wanting to go that direction. And right now, I know a couple kids just got their classes today after waiting 2 weeks. It's been tough. And then because of the NCAA option and some of those other things, it will get real difficult real fast. And then they're going to be 2 weeks behind on top of that. Like it has been a brain. It's been tough. It's really been hard to manage. And I'm ready to tap out as soon as, because that was the thing, is GBA is going, Greenbush Virtual is going to handle it, manage it and everything. But I'm to this point of the year, and I've yet to reach a point where I can tap out. And it's just been constant every day. I'm ready to just do school. But that will put a big strain on the district, potentially financially, above and beyond where we already are if we have a whole rash of students leave because we don't have that outlet.
So I don't know how everybody else feels, because I know this is really easy to go down these different rabbit holes, but just I'm willing to compromise pretty much anything, even if it's inconsistent. And even if I catch flack for it, that gets us to the pragmatic place of in-person learning 5 days a week. And I just want to be totally honest, that doesn't need to shut down any discussion, but as I've struggled with this, I keep trying to force myself just in education, what comes back to that, not in the absence of help, not in any way, shape or form, but what keeps us functional. But that's why we have a bunch of people at the table to say different things along the way. So,
anyone have any more on that one? Anybody else on that? Okay. Phil, do you have another?
No, I think that was good for me.
That's it.
I don't want to hog all the time.
No, that's not.
I mean, in terms, I have no idea who's vaccinated and unvaccinated. I mean, I couldn't tell you. And really, I don't know even, she just comes and tells me, hey, we had this, I need to go to this classroom. And so, other than that, I mean, just in terms of delineating, I don't know that. And she's the only one. Now, certainly a kid could figure it out maybe, but that could be the case with a lot of things too.
Okay, does someone have another item that they'd like to discuss in the mitigation prevention? And that's not just board members, any administrator, anybody sitting at the table, if there's something in here that you say we ought to discuss, tonight's the night to do it, and now's the time to do that. If you have something you'd like to bring up.
let me ask Paul and Kelly a couple things and just, if this is a time, I don't know that this is a time for what I want to talk about. I just want to know where it falls on the agenda. So I don't say it later and you said, well, too bad. I mean, you should have said it 40 minutes. One, if we want to discuss what constitutes a proper mask in our district, where do you believe that's the time to discuss it, Paul?
Right now,
Okay.
during this time.
Two, at the end of our last meeting, we agreed that we were too exhausted to discuss our criterion here and how we wanted to handle that. Where do you think that falls in this meeting?
Now.
Okay.
Can I, does, Lisa, what was the, do you happen to know the criterion for Wellington shutting down by chance?
Yeah, they had 20 positive cases.
Was that a specific building
Two
or?
buildings, between two.
They had two buildings out of four deemed outbreak, which I don't know the
Right.
definition for
I
what
think,
that.
I think five that are connected to each other in one building is considered an outbreak.
And then, correct me if I'm wrong, if something like that were to happen, there would be no remote. It would just be shut down because of the 40-hour rule, correct?
Well, you have 40 hours that you could do online learning during that time. You could, which is maybe a little more than a week that you could do. But essentially, in a lot of those cases, what they expect us to do this year is not remote learning. But if we have to shut down for a period of time, which then most certainly every day that we miss has to be made up.
Can you explain for people who don't because there are a lot of people who don't understand this and say, well, if my kid has to be home for 2 days in quarantine and it's not the full quarantine, why can't they Zoom into class? Why can't they do what they did last year? Can you explain what teachers can do versus what students can do, how that's counted against us? The landscape on that is different this year. So the expectations of what we are allowed to do from the Department of Health versus, or excuse me, the Department of Education versus the Department of Health. We are in different territory this year. And I'm not sure, based on some of the feedback that at least I've received in emails that people have or phone calls, that people really understand that. So would you explain that a little bit more, Mr. Dorsey?
So we were informed quite a while ago, sometime during the summer, that the legislature had basically said no more remote learning as we had been doing it last year with the Acela's choice. That was not a choice to do anymore. We could do an approved virtual school, which is what we've done with the GVA. We could do that. We cannot, they allowed 40 hours per student of remote learning, which was similar to what we did last year that you could do in the school year's time. That's it though. Basically, the legislature was basically telling school districts, yes, we allowed it this year. Okay, next year, you may not do that anymore. You need to have kids in school. We want them face to face. You don't offer that. So we're we are back to what we were doing before any pandemic, which is if you're gone from school, we will gather your homework for you and we will send that home to you. Most certainly try to support you as we can, but the teachers are teaching. But it's similar to the homework thing that we've done before. That does not mean there can't be some online learning. They can go to Canvas. It's just that there isn't going to be a teacher teaching it, but they can stay up to date on their homework and that kind of thing. That is where we are, is where we were prior to pandemic.
So there can't be a Zoom link set up for someone at home to be able to watch instruction.
If we do that, it's remote learning and
then you have to
starts
track the
running
40
the clock
hours.
on the 40 hours so we can do with
Okay.
it. That's why I know people have said, well, why can't
Right.
set up something so I can watch? Well, because the legislature said 40 hours worth, that's it.
And that's per student, and just so everyone
I know.
is clear, who might be, trying to figure out what's going on. That means the district will also have to account for every student, whether that's 8 hours, 9 hours. I mean, that adds another level of accounting, even for basic accreditation processes. So, you know, it isn't a small thing to say, well, just zoom in. Yes, we have the technology, but it's more complex than that. And I think it's important that people understand that piece. It's not an unwillingness on the part of the district. So I just don't want that narrative to be allowed to continue because I'm honestly, you know, I've been frustrated about that piece. Kids or teachers want to help kids. They're busting it to help kids, but they cannot do what they did last year to facilitate that through the legislature's choice about what education needed to learn. And we have to play by those rules, whether we like it or not. So that's what it is, just to speak plainly about that part.
Can I just echo that from the teacher standpoint? I know that's a frustration too. People have come out and said, why can't I just put my laptop in the back of my room and let it play? And explaining that it's difficult. So we're apathetic to that too.
So if a kid is in quarantine for 10 days, that shows up as 10 days of absence in a current system? Okay. I mean, it's excused, so to speak. But
Yes, of course, it's excused.
But our chronic absentee rate is gonna go way up.
So is everybody. Yeah, I was
everybody's
kind
probably,
of curious
yeah.
about how that connects to the fact. Yeah,
And-
there's a lot of metrics attached to that.
And 2 weeks is more than 40 hours of allowed remote learning.
Right.
So we, in that sense, we are also back to, let's do it like it's 2019, everybody. Yeah, when you're sick, it's your responsibility or your parent to help make sure. Fortunately, everything is on Canvas, Google Class. I mean, all the stuff is there and all the way down. I mean, teachers, again, well, you're not going to leave you hanging, but there does have to be initiative on the part of the student and the parents, just like there used to be if you were just home with, you know, the chicken pox or whatever. You have to go get your homework, and that's where we're at. And I don't think that enough people understand that piece of it. And I think that's contributing to the frustration about all of this, which is why we want to keep kids out of quarantine, I mean, mostly for their health, but second to that, I mean, their education and what we can actually legally provide. So.
Well, I fully get parents' concerns about, well, you're choosing to put my kid out quarantine. Why can't I get online learning like I got before? And they're feeling like, I get that. I get that. The problem is we're living with the rules we've been given, which the legislature was really clear. If anybody would like to find that out, they have a whole frequently asked questions document on limiting remote learning for 2021, 2022 that is located on the Kansas State Department of Education fiscal site. And it has a lot of frequent, and this answers a lot of those questions for anybody that would like to look at this. There's a lot of, it's a parent most certainly can work their way through this, but there's a lot of education ease in this.
Yes, there is.
So I can't say that it's completely clear to anybody that reads it, but there is a lot of information in there that provides why remote learning, and it's not a local decision. That is a decision that was made by the legislature. They just did not want to see remote learning anymore. So they put this limitation on it.
I think though what we have to note, and maybe I know I'm speaking a lot for my building, but you're only, in an ideal scenario, you're only being quarantined when you in fact have COVID. And that really wouldn't be different than any other sickness. And so we've already had I think we've had a handful of instances where a kid, I mean, their parents chose to quarantine them, or in fact, they had COVID. What we do is we send an email out. We don't state that they have COVID. We state that this student will be gone from this date to this date. I include all the teachers on that email, and I also include at least one parent. And I say, hey, I've included this parent. I'm just trying to create some dialogue. Yes, I know that we have Canvas. The other part of that is in terms of, yes, we still have encouraged our teachers, even though planned period is by definition non-contact student time. we've encouraged our teachers, if somebody reaches out to you, you need to Zoom with them to figure out what their needs are. Because obviously it's way easier when Dr. Breckeisen and I get that phone call and we say, well, they can Zoom during plan, we'll do that. It's way easier for us to support and defend. And I can tell you, because it happened last year, I mean, I remember vividly, I walked into one classroom last year and one of our support teachers, which was, she came over to the room next to her. She had an iPad like this, and she was with my physics teacher, and my physics teacher was writing out this question on the board, you know, and it was a Zoom, and I could see the student on the other end. They didn't get the answer, so then they had to go down to one of my math teachers in order to get the answer. But my point being is, if they really get in a bind, we can certainly do those things. I get it, it's not ideal, and it's not the same as being in class, but they have that opportunity to access. And that's why, contrary to popular belief, I know our teachers are more than willing to do that. And so we have that available, and that wouldn't count as remote time.
I think that's
So-
comforting to know that when a student is really struggling and really needs that teacher instruction, that teachers are willing to, or someone will track those hours. It's more than what anybody wants to do, but it definitely is comforting.
And then I would say, I mean, if a parent or student can't get access to a teacher via Zoom, then Dr. Breckeisen or myself will go have a conversation with that teacher and say, look, I get it. We really need to do this. Then they might contact Mr. Curran, but that'll be all right. So
I think the other thing is that if you are truly ill, we don't expect you to do work. And you get so many days for every day you're gone to make up that work. And then that's where our staff has also been very willing to look at, okay, they've been gone this many days. What are the true essentials? Now, obviously, anytime something's assigned, you think it's essential, but how can we truly gauge whether or not they've gained that knowledge or not, whether it's a formative assessment or some other way? Because if they know it, why am I going to make them do it? And then figure out the gaps that they might still need to make up when they come back. I mean, we've just got to be creative with some of those formatives and just the way you're going to move forward.
So I guess going back to what Andy said, if there is a county mandate that's set forth for all buildings, then are we going to follow that? Yes or no? Do we know that? Do we have a definitive answer?
Like
Maybe I
what
missed
they
it.
have for the elementary school right now?
Yes, let's say they say
ICPC?
Anybody 12 and over needs to be in a mask.
If
Let's
there's a
say
mandate that says that, I think that we as a board are obliged to follow that.
So if I hear that, and I don't want to speak for everybody, if I hear that, then I would prefer to do away with the metrics that are listed there. I mean, to me, it's black and white. If we're willing to follow that mandate, then we do so when it's set forth versus these numbers here. And then the public thinking, are we simply finagling those numbers and so forth? That's just me personally.
I had the same debate the last week or so, because we busted the metrics the first week of school anyway. So like it wasn't quite oriented right anyway, but I do think it's a worthy discussion to see if we need to either reorient the math here or just say we default to what the county says we're doing. And I don't have a strong opinion either way, but I think it's an important conversation.
I think it makes it easiest because there is a scenario then obviously where we've hit these numbers. We're supposed to all be a mask, but yet the county hasn't mandated that. And again, then I just feel like that's putting us in a really, I mean, either way, it kind of puts us in a spot I don't want to be, but I think it puts us in a better spot. Like, look, the board has elected that we are going to follow a mandate and therefore we will.
I understand what you're saying, Brent. I want to clarify what this document says. It says if we reach these conditions, the board could meet to determine if conditions call for a mask mandate. What you're proposing takes away a layer of freedom for the board.
I understand that now.
As of now, we could say, we have met these criteria. It is now appropriate for our entire district to go to mass. We would cede that authority if we went to something like you're suggesting. And that makes me a little uncomfortable. It is easier and less stress for the board, frankly, if we say, county, got it, here we go. I just am a little hesitant to hand that authority to somebody else. Like now, I think the board should say now, discuss now, how do we feel since we busted these numbers in the first week? I will say that if the county had not acted, I would still be advocating that all our kids under 12 be in mass today. I don't know how the rest of the board feels, and I don't know that I am ready to go above that age yet, because I think that would be an extra layer of safety, and I would like that. I also worry about more students, more families saying, to hell with it, we're out of this district. I don't want that to happen. So I'm kind of inclined to say, let's follow these numbers, and every time we're above this number, let's have this discussion as a board. And maybe we reach a point where you say, we got to do it at the junior high and high school completely. And I'm not sure I'm there yet. And if my fellow board members are already there, that I'm perfectly willing to listen to them.
Yeah, let's have discussion about.
I think that's good you pointed that out, because I don't know that's, even though once I read it, I'm like, okay, yeah, I don't know that's how the public viewed it.
Right.
So.
I wanted to bring up the rubric because I don't want to get away from it, because I want to have that discretion at any time. And I don't think that, because we've always focused on, well, we don't want to do what the county does. We want to look at Baldwin as our own place. We want to look at us as a community. So I don't want to always have to go by the county, but I do think that these numbers need to be looked at again. I don't know how. There's nothing particular that I think needs to be adjusted, but I don't know that they work. So like when I compare it to the numbers that Douglas County puts out, they don't match. There's nothing that I can go with, like the positivity rate for 0 to 17. We don't really, Douglas County doesn't break it down that way, at least not that I've seen. They break it down 0 to 9, and then 10 to, 10 to 17. And then the 0.5% of absences having 7 points. I don't know if that's too heavy. I feel like it might be, but I don't know. So I thought this would be a really good time to have the discussion, since there's so many people who are actually boots on the ground there. So, but I definitely want to keep that ability for us.
So I respect Carrie and Andy's perspective on this, but here are two concerns that I have. I look around at our fellow board members, and I don't see anybody who has any expertise or sufficient expertise, let's say that, in public health, including you, Dr. Harvey. I mean, you're an oral surgeon, you have expertise in that area, but not in public health. And so we keep coming back to, maybe we should look at these and tweak these, but we don't know what we're doing. We don't know how to tweak them, which direction to go, what's appropriate. I mean, we don't know that, right? I understand that there was a desire in the community to have some control in our community over when we make these judgments, right? But I keep falling back to, we gotta trust the people that do this for a living, as opposed to us trying to make this decision. Because I don't know whether this stuff is appropriate or not. And I would challenge any of my board members, no disrespect intended, to know what are appropriate numbers either. We can adjust them, but we're just going to come back in October and we're going to have this discussion again. And we're going to come back in November and have the discussion again, right? I respect the people that put time into massaging these numbers and trying to come up with these criteria. But without a level of knowledge about what is appropriate in terms of biology and how it is that outbreaks of diseases like this occur and get out of control, to me, this is just a shot in the dark. And again, I'm not disrespecting anybody who has a different opinion on this, but I tend to agree that we need to trust the people in the county that do this
So you would say the county, because
I would.
my concern is I'd like the ability to go beyond what the county is saying as far as safety.
More strict.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about going less strict. We can't. I am worried about having the flexibility to say, the county's saying this, but we're here in Baldwin and things are on fire and we maybe need to go to mass at the high school. That's what makes me a little uncomfortable is giving up that option.
And to that point too, I think there is a cap, like we saw in Wellington public schools where they hit, which is an outbreak of 5 in high school, and they just shut them all down, right? So I think there is a floor and a ceiling, and it's all that middle ground where we have some jurisdiction before county health steps in there. And whether that's even worthwhile having metrics attached to that, I truly don't know.
I agree. And if the majority of the board thinks, we should defer to the county, I'm okay with that. But now I don't think the county really agrees with CDC recommendation.
Yeah.
No.
So which authority do you want to defer to? Because the CDC, I think, would be more strict than our county would be at the moment.
If I can interject, and the CDC does not align with the WHO when it comes to our youngest children and masking versus developmental.
So it's all very confusing. That's why we don't want to be in this.
To Tony's point, making the decision. But one thing I would ask us to think about while we're rolling all this over is bringing it back to education. At a certain point, are we slow bleeding this? I mean, if every time we turn around, we're back doing this over and over and over again, people are tired, people are, and with fatigue comes anger, fear, and all the things that get misplaced as a result of that. And it's very understandable. But if everybody, we never know what's going to happen. That's the piece that I kind of like about, well, if we have said we're going to follow the law with the county as we've discussed, and that's what there is a simplicity to that also doesn't just make our lives easier. We're not, that's not the motivation.
Well,
But does it make it better educationally for the consistency of families? I think we knocked that piece out of the park last year. Not that it was a perfect arrangement for everyone, but at least we picked a lane and we did it and people could choose what they needed to do accordingly. We're now in this time where as we worked our way back, we're unintentionally kind of doing this, and not because our intentions aren't pure, but I think it's exhausting our staff. I think it's exhausting our families. And let's reevaluate. I don't know if that, I appreciate the idea of that, but that's where I'm struggling. And maybe it is fatigue on my part. So I just want to be honest about that. I don't know. What does everyone think? Because there are two different choices here. Stay with metrics, don't stay with metrics. And we can't go forward until we answer the question.
Let me say one more thing, and then Phil, I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
You may be right, and I could go that way. And it may be that the county is as good an authority as we can rely on, and I won't squawk.
I get it.
It makes sense.
No, I get it.
I would say, in this ethereal mist of ever-changing guidelines and things we're supposed to do and not do, it's nice to have a hat hook to hang your hat on. We've already set the precedent that we're for sure going to do what the county says. We've from a legal aspect, from all that kind of stuff, from an authority aspect, we're going to do what the county says. So I appreciate Brant's point about saying, hey, look, here's a good thing to do it. I also appreciate Andy's point about wanting to have a little bit of some control, so we, all of a sudden we've got this huge outbreak and we feel like it's necessary. Could you do something as easy as just saying, we'll follow the county guidelines, but we'll reserve the right at any time to come back, reevaluate, and without putting metrics on it, because now all of a sudden, if you write this on paper and it's a metric, now we have to follow that. And oh my gosh, you had this metric and now you're not following it. We could just leave that a little bit nebulous and be able to say that we reserve the right at any point in time as the situation, unfolds. We can come back in and say, okay, we're going into masks.
When I'm confused, I try to fall back on what is the closest thing we have to compare this to. And I know I've brought this up before, but it's like snow days. We don't call a board meeting when there's a snow day. The superintendent makes a decision, hey, we need to shut down school because it's not safe. And I don't know, I just feel like if we had an outbreak and our school was on fire, I trust that our superintendent would say, hey, this is what we need to do to put some water on this fire a little bit. Not to throw it all on you, but if we need to do something. Hey, like they didn't.
Sure. He gets in trouble for calling a school day. Imagine that.
I'm just saying that if we're committing to, listen, let's calm the waters and that people know. we're gonna follow mandates that are issued, period. And, I don't think that precludes us from making a decision that is in the best interest of health and safety, based on what the conditions are in of itself. I mean, I might be wrong about that, but I just think if any of our administrators called Mr. Dorothy and said, we have 60 kids that are positive with COVID. I don't have enough teachers to teach school. We have to shut our building down. I don't know that we need to have like a big philosophical discussion. It's just
Yeah.
what you do to make it work.
I agree,
Am I
and
nuts?
I would be okay with something like that, Phil. I want to be clear, and we're not saying we're ready to defy the county.
Right, correct.
We're willing to maybe go further than county as if extraordinary conditions exist in the district, I would say.
And I will say that the published criteria makes it look less arbitrary if we do decide to make that decision. And as I read it, the final clause is the board could meet to determine if conditions call for a mask mandate. Right? I mean, it sort of leaves it open.
Right.
It doesn't say that we're gonna do a mask mandate. It doesn't say that we must do this. It leaves it sort of ambiguous that we could, and so the criteria to some degree serve at least as a trigger for us, as opposed to just saying, well, if it gets bad enough that we get concerned, then we meet, right? I mean, this at least is something that looks sort of objective, even if the criteria aren't perfect.
So the criteria, just to recall on the timeline here, we put this criteria in before we knew whether the county would make a move or not. We didn't know if they would do a mandate. We were just going, we need something to kind of help us guide if we feel like there needs to be a mandate. And then most certainly, I think we tried to leave it in a position where the board had some chance to talk about that and say, yeah, we're ready, or no, we don't feel it's necessary to do that. So when we made this, I think part of the reason Chris had pushed for metrics was we don't, if we don't have the county saying, go here, let's have something to go by.
Yeah.
So, and is this perfect? Well, certainly it's not. We tried to choose some criteria that tied it in more to,
Not that far.
That's my good side. So anyway, I want to bring that up. At the time, we did not know whether the county would ever step in and do a mandate. Well, certainly we found out they did. So would they do another? I'm sure they will if they feel they need to. I think they want to see how this one's working. And I say that, they may meet this week and say, oh, by the way, we're going to K-12. I don't know that, but I think they will measure that, and their folks up there will do that. So anyway, you guys tell me what you want. No criteria, and it's strictly on.
Oh, I don't want to hear what you're not saying. Or were you saying that you were for using the criteria? I mean, keeping that in there?
I sort of like the criteria because it gives us some kind of standard to make this judgment. Now, let's face it, this is no slam on our neighbors to the north, but 80% of the county's population lives in Lawrence. And so the determinations they're going to make up there are based on mostly Lawrence data. I'm not saying they don't pay attention to some of our data, but at least this gives us, to Andy's point, it gives us a little bit more local sort of control over looking at our numbers. And it does put us in an awkward spot because if we want to be more strict, as it sounds like you're suggesting, we're going to have to step out and use these criteria and do that.
So along those lines, I do think we had to insert somewhere in here that the board will follow all county health mitigation techniques, strategies, mandates, whatever. I mean, work on this language I'm throwing out here right now, but I think we had to have a disclaimer here stating we are following what the county says we're supposed to do by law. Because it's not currently in here now. It is like it's all on our shoulders when it's truly in practice not. Like that ought to be right below that red part. I guess, I should say, or maybe right above that red part.
And a little more clear that that's flexible for us, that this
Yes.
isn't.
The below that, yeah.
This hits and we act.
Yes.
So I feel like we're talking about two options. One erases this wording and says the district will follow county guidelines unless extraordinary conditions lead the board to act above and beyond county guidelines. Off the top of my head, but you get the idea. The other is simply insert somewhere in here, the board will follow county guidelines and leave the criteria in place. I think those are the two
You
things.
want to say guidelines or do you want to say mandate?
Mandate, sorry, whatever, yeah.
Guidelines.
Mandate, yeah.
There's a lot of guidelines. Oh,
So which, I don't know which
Yeah, I thought,
members are leaning.
yeah, to me, it's kind of moot. Because either way, you retain the option to go above and beyond the county mandate. The only real difference is that you've got the semblance of a reasoning why, if you leave the criteria in there, where I don't, and again, seeing both sides of it, if you leave the criteria in there and you're meeting this criteria month after month and after month, and we're not doing a mask mandate, why do we have that criteria, right? So, I mean, I liked your first option, Andy, how you wordsmith that. You know, that saying that we're gonna follow the county guidelines unless the board feels there is, you know, this, I don't remember what you said, but it was beautiful. This emergency thing that the board says we should choose something more, because that gives you then, it takes away that, because I can see people looking at the metric and saying, why do you say this in this metric? Why is that triggering you talking about masks? And it's been triggering you talking about masks for the last 5 months and you don't do it. You know, is this the day that other shoe drops or what, as opposed to, you know, just reserving the right to say, hey, look, we're going to do this when we think it's necessary.
Yeah. You ladies have a preference?
Are you looking at all of us or us?
Or my board colleagues?
I was thinking it might be, one idea might be just to kind of list things that we might look at and not point them, not weight them, I should say.
I like that.
Because I think that's where I'm having the problem is the absences being weighted so heavily. Because I think that there are a lot of people who are going to be absent and not report why they're absent. I think that's my problem when it really gets to it. And just that an absence being more heavily weighted than the positivity rate, I'm not sure. I think the points are what bothers me.
I completely agree, Kara. I think we tried our best to figure out what that was going to be.
Oh, and I think you guys did a great job. I'm not trying to attack.
No, it's fine. I'm not taking offense to it. So, but the one that keeps sticking in my head, if we had, like, God forbid, we had 6 staff members or students that were hospitalized, but nothing else was getting flagged, that's still a reason for us to have a conversation about, we've got to do something else about mitigation here. We're having extreme breakout here. So I think removing that point system would be appropriate, but keeping that criteria as the considerations.
Well, and even making it not all encompassing, because like you just said, I mean, that's not one of your things on there, right? I mean, so it's like, I mean, there could be things off that are not on this list that say, make us say, hey, we should be in masks.
Yeah.
So that's again, that's back to, I would say, I like Andy's way he said that you know, leaving your options open and not limiting it, you know, or saying, you know, oh, this happens, we're not gonna do anything, but if this happens, we do. Because you'd have a list, you know, 100 pages long, or maybe 98 pages long, if you went through, let's go out and list out every possible eventuality.
Well, that'd be really big fun.
Yeah. It's like all my college papers.
So let me ask this. I think I'm getting kind of where you're going here. So not only remove the 7 points, but probably even take off the 0.5%. And you're saying that we will consider COVID absences of staff and students testing positive or suspected positive, and just have the sentence that is something we're going to consider rather than any number.
Right.
I think so.
That's why I think that's important after what we've learned in a year. I would totally have not been comfortable with that last year. But after going through this a year, even though I know people are seeing the lists that we have right now, this little spreadsheet that went out today, like, you know, because you see it all at once and that contributes to, but if you look at the number already that are active versus inactive, it's a comprehensive list. And I don't know that emotionally And I get it. I'm a mom too. Like, I don't want my kids to be sick or get anybody else sick or worse. But you see that list and that's the way we're required to provide it. But emotionally, you just see, and that creates an emotional response, not to downplay it, but not all of them are active. And to my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, a big chunk of those were not at school.
Right.
So, if you put a percentage on that, then, but you guys are gonna know, is this an outbreak in the classroom? Did this happen over the weekend? They're not here anyway. We're good. It's been 48 hours. Like, you're gonna know all those factors. But when we just put this certain number, COVID absences could potentially mean quite a few things that get us up in people's grills in ways that I'm not comfortable with if I'm still not a doctor. That's just me, but. Susan, do you like option 1 or 2 or another option?
The percent is confusing. Can I just ask, so the email we got, that 5.2% positive in our zip code, that is everyone, not students or staff
That's
necessarily?
everybody, yes. Anybody that wasn't got tested.
It's 5.5 now.
Okay, so, that's kind of moot because we need to know students and staff who are COVID positive, but we also, I'm confused why absent is in there, because isn't it a given that they're absent if they're positive?
Right.
Yeah, so is that greater than 5% of students and staff? For our zip code, or, I'm asking because it looks like we're at 10 points if it is, which would mean we would need to be discussing a mask order.
Well, that was kind of my point of saying, like, we've got these criteria out there and.
Yeah.
That's part of why, I definitely wanted to have that discussion tonight because we were there when last we met. And we agreed,
But it was too late. so
let's talk about it here.
So what I would tell you right now is by this point system as it is, you're not at 10 points. You have not reached 0.5% because we have 6 right now that have tested positive and are active right now. So you have 6. That doesn't reach 0.5%. You don't have any hospitalizations, so you don't have those 3 points. Positive testing, you're over 5, so you have 3. And then the positive testing for percentage, the actual average there is 4.55. So you're not there. So you're actually just 3 points.
So Paul, to be clear, we were there when last we met.
Yeah.
Right? That's what you told us.
I thought we were too.
I did.
You did.
Well, then we must have been.
At the end. Here's what
That's a whole
happened.
week ago. Yeah.
Here's what happened as I recall. Megan came over and said, Paul, people are asking why we haven't discussed this. I said, Paul, is that because we have met this number? You said, yes, as of now, we would be over this. And I said, I understand that. We are too tired to discuss that now, but I want it to be discussed when next we meet. So really, whether we're there now or not doesn't matter because we have been there at a time when it was appropriate to have the discussion.
You're right.
And I don't say that because I'm ready to go K-12 mess. I just want to be clear that we have that option if we, so. So I still don't know what the board really prefers. You know how I love writing by committee, so.
I think a good option would be, and you can do the wording, Andy, but I think a good option would be to say, we'll follow the mandate of the county, but the board reserves the right to look at a mask mandate if considering conditions such as the following, and list these, decides for ourselves. Like I said, Andy, you can reword that, but saying, conditions such as these, but not limited to, and just list them,
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I like it a lot, but I have a curveball to throw in the conversation once we conclude this part of it. But
Yeah, well, we'll have to, if we make any change to the protocol document, I just want to remind board members that would need to be a formal motion.
Right.
So.
Can we just keep all of these changes at once and just say we a motion that we make the changes as we've talked about with one motion? Okay.
Curveball.
okay, currently The only mitigation strategy we've talked about in this document of adjusting is masks. It's certainly not the only mitigation strategy we have available to us. I mean, I'm gonna throw ones I don't want us to see use again. The AB date schedule like we used last year is a mitigation strategy we could use. We could do night school. I know, maybe a heart attack over here.
I think we're not allowed to do that one.
Oh,
Yeah, we're not allowed to.
but are there other,
Can't do a hybrid schedule.
it's maybe it's a bad example, but are there other mitigation strategies we should either include in here or just, is it okay just to mention mask? Is there anything else we could ratchet up that we're currently doing?
Well,
I'm glad you brought that up.
there are other things that we did last year, but I think if you'll discuss some of those with Lisa, we felt like it didn't make, like the temperatures. We were taking temperatures at every building or on the bus before they got on. I think we found out through the year, we had 0 people, students that came to the door and ever had a fever at the door with our thermometers. So the question was, why do that if it's not really serving its purpose? So far, as we've gone along, as far as we know, parents are still being cooperative, contacting Lisa and saying, hey, my son's got a fever and this, what do you think? So parents are still cooperating with that and letting us know ahead of time, hey, we may have something here in our house. That is a key thing to all of this, is the parents are cooperating with that and saying, hey, I think I've come down with something and my son was around me all weekend. What do we do?
And I really think too, that because of the consistency that the board had last year and we were consistent the whole way through, parents knew what to expect. And so parents were willing to do what they needed to do. They knew what that plan was. I know other districts, the district nurses struggled with that, with getting information, but the boards were kind of all over the place and, changing one week and then going back another. And so parents were confused but yeah, I attribute a lot of that to the consistency we had last year.
And that goes back to what Bill always talks about. I think we all agree with consistency is important, which I think, again, speaks to a main default of the county's position as where we stand. And not willing to waive any extraordinary circumstance clause, but I think that's fine as a default. So, yeah, sorry.
I was just saying, I think some of what you have just shared with some of the verbiage is a lot easier to explain to parents too. We do get those questions at the front. So because the points have come up.
I guess my only question is, let's just say the wording says following county, except for extraordinary circumstances, the board might decide to go above and beyond. Is that enough, or do we then want to keep this list? I worry the list cloudies.
Yep, I agree.
Cloudies, that's not a word. Clouds
now.
be
Yeah.
fewer. But I'm not opposed. If Tony, if you feel strongly the list is useful, I'm okay.
Well, this is sort of, these are professional standards for me,
Yes.
right? I mean, we decide whether something is significant or insignificant based on a very strict criterion when we're doing science. That's, and we stick to that, right? So we have numbers like that that determine whether we're gonna talk about a finding or not. And the point system, I can't say that it's ideal, but it looks very much like a rubric to me. And I like rubrics, right? Because they sort of say, here you go. Here's how we're gonna weight this stuff. And to me, the absence rate is sort of important, right? And as I read it, it's for testing positive or suspected positive, not for other reasons, right? So if anything, there's a bit of an overlap, I suppose, between the positive testing rate and that first criterion. But that's to say I like the numbers, but I'm okay if we drop the numbers, if we drop the points, if we drop the whole thing, right? But then it just seems like we're getting together and saying things are looking bad.
Based on what?
Yeah.
I feel like too, kind of to that point, we based it on the entire district, but like if we would have visited it, if we had time and everybody wasn't so tired last Monday, we would have hit that threshold. But yet when we looked at the schools, it was the PC and the IC with very little at the junior high and high school. So then we would have which is already in a mask mandate. So we would have, so I don't know if maybe that needs to be per school, per building.
That is definitely why I didn't come here tonight screaming that we need to go K-12. If that data had been all high school last week, I might have come here with that position.
I like rubrics, but tired moms and dads do not like rubrics. So how do we explain, again, in the context of just getting these kids 5 days a week in person, educating the way we want to educate them? How does this make sense for families and doesn't create, is there a way that we can use the metrics that make people comfortable to kind of have that lever in place for the check-in conversation? That will make some of our board members comfortable, but also not add just layers and layers of ambiguity for families. That's where I'm hung up.
I mean, I think if you do leave it open, say we'll revisit if we need to in extenuating circumstances, as long as you come back and say these are the extenuating circumstances, we've got 4 kids from the high school that are in the hospital, and this is why we're going to masks. I mean, as a parent, I would be understanding, say, oh yeah, let's do that, as opposed to, I would feel personally like I'm like checking it. I'd be doing my own math at home. So, okay, I'm really gonna put us in masks yet, that kind of thing. So I think I'm squarely in the camp of saying, let's just leave it open. And then if we do decide to go above and beyond what the county does, at least be able to point to this is why.
This is the reason
why. This is the reason why. Put that out there, because I think as long as you can support it, I think you could do what you need to do.
Yeah. Other thoughts?
I think it's important to be completely transparent and for everyone to understand what we're doing. But we also need to remember that the purpose of the metrics is to know whether the board's going to meet or not. The purpose of the metrics doesn't determine whether a student masks or not. We know that's optional in the secondary school. We know it's not optional in the elementary. So, I mean, yeah, we could meet and say it's not optional in the secondary anymore based on the metrics, but it doesn't really change anything for the parent or family at this point.
Yeah. So is the board going to meet every week in the winter? Because I just want to ask if that's what we're saying. I just want to play that all the way through. Are we meeting every week to reevaluate, or are we empowering administrators to use a system? Because if the conversation is, well, this allows us to meet, are we meeting every week? Because if we're going to do that, that's okay. But I want us to make that decision knowingly. And there can't be any more, we're too tired. We either have to do something about public comment, quite frankly, or we cannot table any more district business. We have to be, and that's the same thing about this. We have to figure out how we're going to conduct the business on behalf of the district to meet the needs of the administrators and staff. So if we're going, I'm just asked my thought about that piece. Can we as a board then commit to meeting once a week? If the case may be, if it flip flop, we don't know what it's going to do. Last week it was high, this week it went down. And if we were basing it on that, if we have to have a board conversation every time, then is that reasonable? Is that realistic? Maybe it is, but I just want to ask.
I do not want to meet every week. I don't trust Paul. And
don't?
I do not.
Keep us twice a week.
I love you all.
If we do, I would suggest by Zoom.
I want to trust our administrators to warn us if things are getting
Well, and you
out
give
of
them the
control.
authority.
And if the administrators want to use this metric to inform that decision, more power to them.
But it's really going to be Lisa in conjunction with,
Yes.
I mean, we say administrators, but it would really be her.
I
having-
initially said Paul and
That's
Lisa.
what I
Yeah.
It's really the
Sorry,
health
I
department too,
didn't mean that
because,
to exclude you.
with all the tracking and everything, it's really the health department that lets us know, okay, we aren't figuring out where these positives are coming from and how we're meeting, But last year, I mean, there were 2 really rough weeks, the end of October and the 1st of November. I'd say, are we really doing okay? And they'd say, yeah, you're doing fine. We know where they're coming from. We know who they're attached to. Mr. Dorothy would call me, are you sure we're doing okay? I said, I just checked, we're doing okay.
And
So-
I think doing it that way does narrow the window of us probably acting outside the county mandate. I think probably if you're telling us, Paul, we got an issue, probably the county is acting. But I don't mind having that little window there where the county has not felt it necessary to act, and you maybe think it's time for us to have a discussion.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that, most certainly Lisa monitors this every day, talks to the county almost every day. And most certainly, when it comes to this, and Lisa can tell you through last year, I'm calling her on a regular basis and saying, Lisa, are we at this yet? Are we there? No, the county says we're good.
We can connect
A
it
lot,
up.
a lot of it is not necessarily numbers sometimes. And I know we want numbers here, but sometimes it's like Lisa said, can you track all this down to exactly where it happened? And if you can do that and make all those connections, then it's okay. Well, we've got this under control then because we know where it's coming from. When it all starts just burning like fire, and we don't know where it's coming from and why, that's a point where we've got to have a real discussion about whether we need to do something different. And so here's the thing. I know we tried to start this year, but certainly this is not any way any of us wanted to start this year. The county jumped in and did a mandate at the elementary level. Okay, we had to do that. We've all determined that's what we got to do. So they did that for their reasons and so on. They have not done above 12 years old at this time. Don't know yet that they're going to. I think they're still looking at that. But I think we've got to come to some consistency for parents. That's what we did last year. Not everybody liked it. Definitely not everybody likes what we're doing now. But I think we've got to come to consistency of this is what it's going to be. Having this criteria, I get why we did it. I understand why we did it, but I'm not so sure this is because now I think there are people going, well, but it's this and it's this. You're there. Why are you not jumping to this? Well, because there's more to consider than that. Right now, the elementary is already in a mask mandate. They're already there. How many are we going to double mask? I mean, they're already there. And then at the high school level, we're not seeing these numbers. Knock on plastic, but we're not seeing those. So why would we want to make that move? The junior high has, I would say these things.
Don't even say it.
Lisa, okay. So you guys know what
We all know. Don't say it.
I'm not going to say that, but those things don't warrant that extra move. We might have extra numbers and that kind of thing at the elementary. We're in the mask. We're mitigating as much as we can right now with what we're capable of doing. The other move, I would rather depend on the county to say we're jumping in to do this. The only thing about that is most certainly they've got the whole county. Lawrence is most of the population. They're going to consider that more so than but they do consider us. Don't think that they just say, well, Baldwin City doesn't make any difference. We're doing this. That is not true. I just think we need to get a consistency and say, here's where it is. So people know from week to week, this is what it is. This is what I have to deal with. And that's just my feeling. And
Paul, it sounds like you would be most comfortable with what I mentioned earlier, which is the board will, the district will follow county mandate, mask mandates, however you want to say that.
Right. And
in extraordinary
in
circumstances, the board reserves the right to
yes.
go above and beyond.
Yes, in extraordinary circumstances, this board most certainly could say, we're meeting, we're going to have a special meeting tonight. My goodness, we got 10 kids in the hospital.
Yeah.
We've got to meet tonight. We're going to do something extra because this is not working. At least, but every time everybody has to understand, that doesn't mean the whole rest of the school year. It definitely means this year for the time being, or the time we need to do it. I would not recommend to do any of these things long term. We'll live with the mandates until they can feel like they can take them off. But I don't think they have to go long term. I don't think that's how this thing is running, but maybe it runs away from us. I don't know. But at least that's what I'm saying.
I'm good with that. And again, if we are going to trust the judgment of our especially our two professionals. And if you guys want to rely on these metrics we put together, that's totally your call. But I think what the board is saying, we're okay having a simple statement there.
So I'd be okay with that, except the thing that concerns me is that like we're talking about the numbers at the lower grades are higher right now, or they're the ones that are pushing us into where we would be, where we go into the mandatory if we were going by this. And then the county mandate is set to expire around September 22nd, I think. So if the county mandate in the lower levels expires, but we still are seeing numbers, then what? Do we let that lapse for us, or are we able to still come back and say that that's extraordinary? Because then we're at a position where, well, we don't know what it's going to look like without the masks, but I mean, I would want Deb and Dan's input on that to see where we were and what their opinions were. I would want that opening without having to rely on extraordinary situation.
Well, I mean, we'd be the ones that determine whether it's something extraordinary. I mean, so I mean,
That just
it's
seems
open
pretty
ended.
extreme.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it can seem whatever you want it to seem. Though,
Extraordinary.
it allows us to stay nimble and be able to, we're not tied down by certain criteria, and allows us at any point. And if you want to strike the word extraordinary, just the board reserves the right to implement a mask mandate as it sees fit. If you want to just eliminate the extraordinary.
I like as it sees fit better. It just,
Be fine. I hate to muddy the water further because we were close. I had wondered along those lines, Carrie. Yeah, but we're gonna follow the county, or we're not in that. I just wondered if the county does away with theirs, are we done that day? Are we following the county as soon as theirs drops off?
the way that we're wording it, we would. I mean. if we're
No, correct me if I'm
following
wrong. The county does have an end date on there.
Yeah.
Yeah, 22nd or 23rd.
They'll reconsider it
Yeah.
on that date, whether they're
Yeah.
done or if they're going to extend it. Again, I think it's up to Lisa and I and the other administrators to say, okay, this thing's coming to an end, but we've got this many cases in the elementary level. I'm not sure if the county lets it go, if we want to let it go.
Well, I think you just put it
Certainly,
there.
that's us communicating with you guys and saying, guys, here's where we stand at the elementary level. If they make that move, maybe we need to let people know we're going to stay in it for another week.
Well, I don't think we can make that decision now, just like you said. I mean, that's far enough ahead. I just think that maybe we should have a meeting on the night of the 22nd, or maybe the 23rd then, to say we need to discuss it because
Regulars on the 20th?
Yeah, we're pretty
We
close.
would know what we need to know by the regular board meeting in September.
Okay.
That Monday.
so we know ahead of time whether they're going to do it or not.
Well,
That's what
we
I'm
know
saying.
what
We
our
don't know
conditions
that.
are.
Right, that's what we know what our
Yeah.
conditions are.
We
Gotcha.
know what
Okay,
our
gotcha.
conditions are.
Okay, because I think that's a decision that should be reserved for them.
Well, and then you could at least communicate with parents and say, if the county drops this mandate, you need to know that the board is going to extend because of our issues.
Right.
We're going to extend out to October 1st.
Right.
But so that's a matter of us communicating where we stand. And most certainly Lisa is excellent at continuing to keep me up to date about where we stand and what we need to do. So
Along these same lines, part of why I wanted to talk to administrators was to get Derek, and I'm sorry, I'm hitting you cold with this. Before the county acted, I had wondered if we could cover the lower two buildings. I knew that didn't capture all our 11-year-olds, but I thought it was too tricky. Well, the county has pushed us into that tricky area. And I wonder how you're coping, and if 6th grade is too messy and you would like the board to consider all 6th grade masks, or what we could do to make sure that things are working for you.
Tricky is a good word. It has been very tricky. There are days where it seems like it would be easier to say, well, we'll just have all the 6th grade students do it. But to the point that Mr. Birmingham was kind of making earlier, we're already delineating a lot of different groups as it is. So I'm of the opinion now, kind of that we just kind of need to stay the course with how we're going.
Okay with you, Lisa?
Consensus.
Okay.
Discussion.
You have this wording because I haven't been writing that all
Yes, you want, I mean, off the top of my head again, or do you want me to write something while we're,
Please write something.
so I'll remove myself from discussion for a while? Is that the goal here? Sneak attack? One other thing while I'm writing, the other thing I wanted to discuss was, I would like to be clear about what constitutes a mass. If we have, I don't want to accuse any of our families of subverting the county's intent, but if we have people who are sending their kids to school in mesh, and that leads to more cases, that means we're not following the county's mandate and we're in a bad spot. So I would like to talk to those principals and see if it's an issue. We hear it's an issue, I don't know. And if we need to tighten up what constitutes a mask in the district.
At the junior high, we've been pretty clear if it needs to be a standard mask. I think we had some language at the very beginning of the pandemic from Lisa about what was okay. For instance, the ones with the little ventilators on the side are not okay. If they, in my building, if they've not had the right mask, we've just gotten them a disposable one. It's not been an issue for my building.
The county definition of a mask, the same one that's adopted by CDC?
No.
No.
So that's what we need to clarify too, because Lisa and I have talked about some that meet the letter of definition of a mask. And so we can't say that doesn't work. So if we gotta be clear which definition we're using, because that's gonna be another gray area.
The CDC, that's what I've been confused. So in this document from CDC that was updated May 28, it talks about masks should block light when held up to a bright light source.
That's not on the county.
And that's not on the county.
Yeah, they were pretty broad in theirs. I mean, they basically said,
Apply.
yeah, but they only recommended to apply. So mask or other face covering means a covering of the nose and mouth that is secured to the head with ties, straps, or loops over the ears, or is simply wrapped around the lower face. A mask or other face covering can be made of a variety of synthetic and natural fabrics, including cotton, silk, or linen. Ideally, a mask or other face covering has 2 or more layers. A mask or other face covering may be factory made, sewn by hand, or can be improvised from household items such as scarves, bandanas, t-shirts, sweatshirts, or towels. So I mean, like by the county guidelines,
Yes.
I've got a mask on, right? I mean, that's by what they have.
So that's our dilemma.
Mhm.
It
I mean-
meets, so we allow it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what happened in a class was the student came in a mesh mask that met the county definition. And the rest of the kids said, that's not a mask. If that kid doesn't have to wear a mask, then I'm not gonna wear a mask either, and pulled their masks off.
Was that a one-time event or has that been recurring?
It was the first week of school.
But since then, it's been better. I mean, are you
In
still seeing
that
ongoing?
In that particular classroom, yes.
What, was it 2 or more layers? Because that's
It
what was
says-
the recommendation.
Yeah, they said ideally it is made up of 2 or more layers.
But that is a CDC, so I'm wondering if that, I know it's not saying it has to be 2 or more layers, but if we think about the broader, the CDC recommends 2 or more layers, and they're saying ideally, can we make that a stretch that it has to be 2 or more layers?
I mean, I think that if we're going to be consistent in everything, you know, like Tony was saying, none of us are qualified to make that. We've got somebody who is qualified to make that. And this is the statement that they come up with. I feel like that we should follow this statement. I mean, everything we've said so far is we're going to follow what the county guideline says, you know, and if they don't feel strongly enough about it to say it has to be this, and it has to be this, and it has to be this, then who are we to then say, oh, it should have to be this, it should have to be this, it should have to be
Well,
this.
if you're gonna go with that, though, it doesn't say mesh on it.
Well, I know, but
You know, I mean,
yeah,
so
that's what I'm saying
mesh
is,
maybe isn't okay.
well,
We
but
can
it,
absolutely put that in our protocol. There's no reason we can't put
But I
it.
do want to point this out.
Mhm.
On each of those cases on the masks that were of consideration, Lisa made contact with the county
Mhm.
and the county said it meets our definition.
Oh.
So that's kind of where we were at. So, and we are requiring them to do at least what the county has asked them to do by definition. So that's where it is. I want everybody to know every one of those was vetted through the county, and the county said, yeah, that meets our definition. And if that's intentional, I think they spent a lot of time on that wording before they did it. Whether we think that's right or not, most certainly you've been talking about going above and beyond. The board can do that, but at the same time, if you're getting back to the mandate does, the definition does not have, probably the most important words are tightly woven. I think that's what's in the CDC and so on, that it does not include that in the definition. And that, as it appears, as you read the definition, that was taken out. That was purposeful. I don't know, but it was, those words were pulled.
I mean, that's kind of back to my thing about having a hat hook. I mean, you've got something in writing that we're supposed to be following that says this is what it is, this is what we point at and say, this is what we're doing.
I put Derek on the spot. Deb and Dan, do you feel you need coverage above and beyond that wording? Or are you doing okay?
We've, at the primary center, we're just going by what the county definition is. So if kids come in a mesh mask,
And I go back to the cases we have weren't school cases. So I don't think there's a way we can say, well, because not every mask is beyond the scope of the counties, that's why. I think it's one of those, our bigger issue, and we're only a week into it. I think this will probably sort itself out. Hasn't been the mask as much as it's been helping the two groups, the kids who have exemptions and the kids who don't, because the kids who don't are like, how come I have to wear my mask? And this, so we've left it as, that's something that parents have worked out with our nurse. Everybody has that option, but you have to meet certain criteria, and we leave it alone because we don't want to get into, well, you must have something medical, or like Grant said, that's none of anybody's business. We just leave it as, we tell the teachers, that's something their parents have worked out with the nurse. Your parents have that option. They just need to contact her. And of course, obviously at the adult level, there are criteria for getting exemption. And if you meet one, you can do that. So that's been a bigger issue is both the kids who are not masked trying to not having to explain all the time to their peers why they don't, and the kids who aren't, why they still have to wear one when some kids don't. That's been a bigger challenge than I think we anticipated.
I'll add that I'm in favor of following the county guidelines as well, in part because, like, it's happened several times, when that phone call needs to be made to double check, does this meet the criteria? We know who to call at the county, we don't know who to call at the CDC or KDHE or whatever it might be, right? So we've got a reference point that we can directly connect back to, get authorization for that mask, and go forward.
I think that if we do our own mask mandate in the future, then we should clarify and make our own definition then. So I think we absolutely can do it in here. And then if we do our own, we should do that. Clarify and make our own definition. But right now, it doesn't seem worth it. And, and another point is on the lighter fabrics. I know that because I do ADA stuff at work, and sometimes we've been able to work with the medical exemptions for the lighter fabrics, because some parents do want their kid, or some students do want to wear a mask, and then the lighter fabrics help accommodate that medical condition and allow them to wear one. Just a tidbit.
I think it's great that if there's a mask mandate, it's going to be hard enough for me to police the mask, let alone is it 2 layers or 3 layers, or does it need, like, I don't want to make it harder than it already is. I mean, it's already going to be impossible. And to make our own criteria as what's acceptable as a mask or not, if we go above and beyond what's already there, it's just gonna make it really, really difficult from my chair. And then I'm dreading being mask police already, if that ever comes down the pipe, especially with the older kids. I think we're gonna have big pushback. I think it's going to be an absolute nightmare. And to say that one mask is different than the others, if I've got to check the layers or whatever, you're putting Mr. Bringham and I in a very tough spot on a daily basis.
So why don't we go ahead and go around the table, because we have a lot of other stuff to talk about. Are there any, if there's anything else that, because this will need, if there's any change that needs to be made based on what our discussion has been, then it would need to be codified in some kind of motion. It can be done in one thing. If you're not ready for that, that's fine, but let's go around the room and see if we can get a motion out of this. Unless, is there any other thing that's problematic about the protocols as they are? Otherwise, or do you have any other recommendations that you want to offer
Before you go around the room, here's what I wrote.
Oh, okay.
The district will follow all county mask mandates. The board reserves the right to react to conditions in the district in considering going above and beyond county mandates.
And that means no metrics.
My understanding.
Like,
You can still use them if you want.
well, yeah, try and use something.
Willy-nilly.
Okay. So it's been read. Are we okay with that being a motion, or would someone else like to make the motion of what Andy just read?
So I'll make a motion that we accept Andy's rendition of our COVID mitigation criteria, or yeah, as written, as presented.
Second.
I'll second.
Well, Andy wrote it, so you get the second.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay. Phil has moved and Andy has seconded. Thanks again for writing that up. All those in favor, please raise your right hand.
This
and
is approving.
sorry, approving the changes that he just read.
What should we say? Because there
Just
was,
his-
Was there
just
another
what he
change?
read.
there was the
All-
consultation with your doctor thing at the
whole-
beginning.
The
So,
whole document.
Oh, let
We're
me,
voting on two changes here.
right,
okay, you can amend the motion
Which
to
of-
include everything. So we have a standing motion on the table that includes the statement that you just read about following the county mandates, and then also, but reserving the right to go further based on school district specific conditions. And then there could be an amendment to that motion to add the language, thank you for reminding me, which was, I'll just do it. I move that we amend the following statement, USD 348 strongly encourages all staff and students eligible for the COVID vaccine in consultation with your, wait, where does it go? COVID vaccine, sorry, start over. USD 348 strongly encourages all staff and students eligible for the COVID-19 vaccine in consultation with your physician to be vaccinated. That is the substituting statement from where it was before. So that's the amendment. Is there a second to the amendment?
second,
Okay, so we have to vote on the, no, we don't. Yeah, we still have to vote on the amendment. All those in favor of accepting the amendment, as I just said, please say aye. Raise your right hand.
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0. So now the new motion that we're voting on, that was moved by Phil, seconded by Andy, now includes both the language about in consultation with your physician, where we have the recommendations about vaccination language there, and that also includes the other part that we're following the mandate, but we reserve the right based on our own district conditions. So now that's the full motion. So it was moved by Phil, seconded by Andy. All those in favor, please say aye and raise your right hand.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries 7-0. And you got that? There's no idea.
I don't know why there were two, I don't, I'm not following.
Because it's an amendment to the motion.
So
So
you approve the amendment.
Okay.
Before you.
you have to, if you can do it all at once. So Phil, did you get who moved once? We've got it
Phil and
recorded
Andy.
too. Phil and Andy. And then I did the amendment and I can't remember. who
I think I
seconded.
seconded it.
Thank you.
And Phil seconded.
And then we voted unanimously for that because we amended.
Okay,
I can help later.
okay,
Is it appropriate? I'm gonna send Paula and Megan this wording. Okay.
that would be awesome. Okay, I think we've kind of covered 1 and 2 together, just by the nature of our conversation, but is there anything that you would like to, since we're done with number 1. Number 2, we've kind of spoken about that. Is there anything that you would like to add? The county mandate impacts and the law. Anything additional? Kind of weaved itself into.
I think the idea about the conversation piece about exemptions and how to help the 2 groups of kids, to me, that falls under support for students to have more, because you put that out there and nobody really responded to it. Maybe you should, like, how do we
Yeah.
help, right? To me, that falls under support for students, but if it falls under number 2, because that is part of the impact, then that's okay too. But so there's a couple of ways that conversation could happen. So opening the floor for county mandate impacts in the law, item 2. If not, we can move on to number 3. Good?
Move.
Okay, moving on to number 3, day-to-day operations and needs of each building. Principals.
If you guys have anything that you want to bring up as far as COVID related in the buildings.
At the primary center, we're having a hard time just keeping stocked with kid-sized masks. And I probably just need to do a weekly order from Amazon. Because we go through them.
I would say the same thing. I think we're finding less kids have their favorite or their favorites that they brought last year. We're giving out more, which is fine. We're giving out to bus drivers. We're giving them out to teachers. So we ended the year with like, what are we gonna do with all these masks after end of last year? Now we need to find some more and we're ordering them, but they're not coming in as quickly. And we had lots of donations last year. People made them for us. So we are running low on those. And the other thing I need to make sure people know is in your mitigation measures, like where it talks about classroom space, where it says as much as possible, we are doing that as much as possible, but it is less possible than it was last year because the classes are bigger. And it's a struggle for teachers to keep them 3 feet apart sometimes. It's just a challenge of kids, but also a space issue. We have them spread out in the morning in the gym. We start with 6 feet, and when that space fills up, we go to 3 feet. And so far, just because of the numbers, we've been able to do that. We still control the crowd sometimes when they go to class in the morning, and of course they're masked in their classrooms and they're masked in the building, so it helps. But some of those mitigation measures would be better if we could keep them apart, but there are so many more physical limitations because of the number of kids. Our biggest class last spring was 20. Our smallest class right now is 23. Our biggest class is 26. So it does make a difference.
And I do think that goes back to the part of this that folks are really have had a hard time, at least in the emails that I've gotten, that they don't understand. Why can't you do more with spacing? Because remote learning was an option that you could use last year, and that lowered the number of kids in the school. And the state says you can't do that anymore, then unless you decide to go with our virtual option, then there are more kids. We're not doing the hybrid schedule whereby we've decreased our student population by 50% every day. Therefore, we can't just poof and add square footage. The square footage is the square footage. And I know that's been a concern with parents. One question that I had, because square footage is square footage, how are the outdoor learning pieces go? Because even though COVID absolutely stunk and things we had to do last year were really hard, I thought one of the benefits was I saw a lot more kids outside during the school day. And I think you all know how I feel about outside air. I've talked about that for many years prior to COVID, but how is that working for this year?
The other thing we've run across is since school started, it hasn't been under 90 degrees.
Well, that's a good
And
point.
so
Yeah.
that's going to happen.
Fair
It's just
point.
right now, it's really difficult to go
Yeah.
out there and be in the sun and try
Yeah.
to learn. So I think our teachers are utilizing that outdoor space too, because we are still trying to separate outside of the playground rather than having 100 kids in one area. There's 25, 25, 25. But that also takes the outdoor spaces away for
Right.
the other classes that aren't at recess who are learning.
Yeah, that's a good
But
point.
right at this point, it's like, it's
It's so hot.
been disgustingly warm to be outside.
Can we use like water balloons?
They're
for
like,
math
we don't want to go to
equations?
recess because it's too hot.
Yeah. Okay. What about junior high, high
Yeah.
school? How's that?
At the junior high, same issues and challenges with spaces. Our building, I think most people know, is the oldest in the district. And some of those interior classrooms are pretty small. And it makes it, and some of those are sixth grade classrooms that have 11-year-olds in them, which makes it very difficult to space in those settings. We have not run out of masks from last year yet. We're just about there. We just don't have nearly as many kids that are having to go through them. Other than that, those are kind of the big things. I will always advocate for additional custodial staff to help with some of the challenges faced by this. We do try to have them. If we get a report that we think someone's a close contact or something of that nature, Mr. Pruitt, our head custodians, often ready, making sure that teachers have disinfectant and everything else they need for their classrooms.
High school?
Other than dress code, no issues. I've been, I mean, I get it. We're a little bit different than the other buildings, obviously, because we don't have to wear masks. I don't know what percentage, 20% maybe. I really don't know the percentage of students wearing masks. I don't know. I think Dr. Breckheisen can attest. I mean, it's awesome. Just everybody in the building and so forth, and being able to do the things that we wanted to do. I think really, and it's not anything in terms of a need for our building, but I do think the kids are having some difficulty adjusting. There's just so much stimuli right now, and all the kids being back into the building, getting back on track, just doing the things that they need to be with the decisions, to be successful. I think that's taking some time. Just kids already doing making some poor choices. So we've dealt with that a little bit, but I don't know, you can chime in. I don't know that we have any really specific needs right now.
I would 100% agree. And I think that the students that have expectations from home to wear them are wearing them very well. I don't see the partial mask wearers. I don't see the ones trying to just comply with parents part way. I see them wearing them to lunch. I see them then take them off just long enough to eat lunch. But when they get up to go back and get more, they're putting them back on. And I don't see any, and they are still being social with their friends. That's when they go sit down at the table, but they're very conscious of how long they have their mask off. And I think that our kids are so used to it at this level and at the age and more mature that there's really no issues. So, I mean, but it is great to see a full lunchroom, and it's great to see the hallways being noisy, and it's just really nice to feel somewhat normal on a daily basis. But I would agree that the getting back into routine and having expectations, there's more than just a few struggling with needing to be where they need to be on time and those kind of things. And we're just going to continue to reestablish that culture and expectations.
I laugh because I still can't figure out the math. Like, I know how many seats we have in here. I know how many students, and I keep dividing by 3, and it never seems to work out, but yet we don't need more seating like we did last year. So I think we spent maybe 3 hours on one math problem. So I still don't have a solution, but it works. So you'll see it when you stop by. So
Anything else on day-to-day?
Just one thing, just FYI, Walmart Distribution Center just gave us a pallet of hand sanitizer and sanitizer wipes. Equate brand gave those to us for free. They are at the warehouse. We've got them. So they're available whenever you need them. The hand sanitizer is 12-ounce bottles. So they're there for use. But anyway, Walmart Distribution Center gave this to us.
That was nice. Anything else anyone would like to add under number 3 before we move on to special education? We're moving on about 2 hours, though. That might be an actual time for a bathroom break, 5 minutes. Coming up on 2 hours, and I don't want to cut special education short because then we'll be past 2 hours and right in the middle of it. So, does anyone have anything to add to item number 3? Okay. Why don't we do a 5-minute recess and then we can come back and start on special education if that's okay? All right, thank you. 8:23.
It can be. It will be. Even going all the way, you're gonna
And it's the first part that has.
clearancing them out for the most part.
Everyone unmute.
I know. It's some more.
Everyone unmuted. All right. We will go ahead and call this meeting back to order. Thanks for the indulgence of a little bit of a break. Let's start with item number 4, which is special education.
So the board, we had had several questions about special education cases coming up in our conversations as we've been talking about COVID and how to handle this, different things. So most certainly the board asked if Mr. Ray could be here tonight to maybe talk about a few things, but at the same time answer some questions about special education as affected by COVID as we move along. So with that, we can start having, if someone has a particular question they would like to start with, we can do that, or we can let Mr. Ray kind of start with a little beginning to this.
Can I lay a little foundation first?
Please.
All right. The great thing about special education is that since it's been going on for almost 50 years, in terms of the structure of the IDEA, the federal guidance that we've had is pretty clear on just keeping the student first, which I very much appreciate, and also making everything within the framework of the IEP process. So COVID or no COVID, our process has been pretty consistent in terms of how we address the needs of individual students within each of the districts that we support. So, so our guidance to our psychologists has always been to offer parents a forum through an IEP meeting if they have any changes that they want to recommend to their students' programming, but that the primary tenet of IDEA is the team process, which makes certain that all members of the team have meaningful input, but that everyone has to come to a consensus about what the needs of the student are and how to best serve those needs. So when COVID hit, we did deviate a little bit down the path of contingency plans because we knew that no matter what our FAPE offering was to each individual student, and that's our free appropriate public education offering as outlined by the IDEA, we knew that there were going to be interruptions to that FAPE and that we were going to have to address those through the form of contingency plans. So last year, we had contingency plans in place for all of our students in the event that we had to go remote or hybrid or other. So whatever that might be. So we did have those contingency plans covered. This year, we are not doing contingency plans. We are back to offering full in-person offerings. Couple of things that have come up, and I've watched the board, the presentations, public comments on board. So I'm aware of some of those situations, which I won't call out individually, but I'll just say that within the context of the decisions that the parents make, if that is outside of the context of the IEP team decision on what the best way to address the needs of that student are in their least restrictive environment in the schools, our guidance has been consistent that we are going to maintain the IEP team decision and that we will provide the services that are detailed within that IEP in the environment in which the IEP team determined it to be most appropriate for that child. So that when a decision is made to take them out of that environment, that falls outside of the bailiwick of what our authority is under the IDEA. And so we will defer to the IEP in those cases. We always offer a meeting to the parents if they want to discuss changes to the IEP, which that is their right, and we would never deny a parent their right. So, but primarily, that's special education in a nutshell. We go by the team process, and then we are certainly willing to entertain conversations as long as the entire team is appropriately comprised and involved. And with that, I'll just open it up to any questions you might have.
So I think one question that needs to be answered, what are the expectations for services if a student is in quarantine or has COVID?
We're going to treat quarantine students much like a short-term illness, because we don't anticipate that that's going to last very long. In other words, there won't be any changes to the IEP. There will be, we've actually had a couple of circumstances where students have particularly unique circumstances of autoimmune deficiency disorders where we have to provide them with a little bit more of a remote option, just to keep them engaged, because the whole purpose of the IDA is to make sure that we level the playing field for kids who have disabilities so that they can access the general education curriculum. That's the only purpose for special education. And so when they are not able to access, based upon a parent's choice, to keep them more safe in this particularly toxic environment, then we will meet with that individual parent on a case-by-case basis, and we will determine how much of a connection we can maintain with the general education curriculum without going outside of the state provided guidelines. And so we do that on a case-by-case basis. On individual quarantine cases, our go-to is going to be to provide the services necessary to keep them engaged in the curriculum without violating any of the state guidelines. And also to make sure that in the event that they do miss out on some services, I always go to what is the remedy if we do miss a little bit more time than we thought they were going to miss. And that would be that we would offer compensatory services if necessary. But we want to keep them engaged in the general curriculum and keep them flowing down the road. So we would make individual arrangements, and we have done that. I have a couple of meetings this week where we're encouraging parents to bring their students back, because we believe that the benefit to keeping their students safe is certainly exceeded by the detriment that they're experiencing in the removal from the high school curriculum. And so those are situations where we address them on a case-by-case basis. And as always, any of those situations, if there's a disagreement with the parents and the team, then we will prior written notice them as to the decision and make certain that we are on solid legal footing.
And I think that was my next question, or at least I think what we've encountered was for instance, we have a student that's on IEP and then they choose to go the virtual option, Greenbush, what providing services might look like for them. And I don't think we've had an instance yet where we felt like we needed to have a team meeting that would then address and say, no, we feel like your FAPE option is being here because this is where we can best provide services. I don't think we thought we would, but they've chose to go a different route.
Oh, and there's still time.
Thank you.
We're like I said, every case is different. And so there are certainly situations where maybe the Greenbush option is accessed when it shouldn't be, because we know that the student is not going to be able to keep pace because of their disability. And in those cases, the IEP team will recommend that the FAPE offering remain intact at the school, and that if they go outside of that offering, they're going to be at risk of losing some of those services because we cannot support them to the same level in a remote or virtual environment. We do have to consider that on a case-by-case basis as to what kind of supports would be necessary in order for them to be successful. We think that there's a reasonable chance that they can be successful. We'll certainly do whatever we can to support that choice. But it comes down to, there are situations for example, for a student with multiple disabilities and in a life skills classroom, there's no way to maintain that curricular connection in a virtual environment. There's no way to make progress within the general education curriculum within a virtual environment. And in those cases, we always present the FAPE offering being at the school and making certain that the parents know that we will take all the precautions necessary to keep their kids safe, but that's where their FAPE offering lies. And if they choose to go outside of that, then we're always there to send a ready, willing, and able letter and say that as soon as you make a choice to re-enroll your student in this in the FAPE that the IEP team is determined to be appropriate for your child, we're ready to serve.
Is the only option for virtual learning for modification, is it only, is PACE the only option?
No, no, there are different, and in fact, all three of the districts approach it differently. There are different options for, there's all kinds of virtual options out there.
I mean, with Greenbush, is it just like, are there any other modifications that can be made besides the PACE of the virtual that Greenbush gives to us that we have signed off? So they can go slower, or they can, are
Right.
there other modifications that can be made with the virtual option?
We haven't had too many students on IEPs choose that option.
Yeah.
So we really haven't experienced what the scope of our modifications would have to be
Yeah.
in
And I was
order to
just
make
wondering
that
about the
address.
differentiation of learning. It doesn't seem to be a lot of good options
Right.
for that, but
I don't think anything really takes the place of the face-to-face experience for our kids, just because the range of disability is so great that within that, there's so much that can be missed when a student is going completely remote. That's why, even though the contingency plans were in place, our preference was certainly to make certain that as soon as the student could return to face-to-face instruction, they would. And this year, we had high hopes that we were going to remain that way for the entire year. Still have those hopes. We're gonna do it until we can. So, but yeah, it just depends on a case-by-case basis. We may decide to go with more extreme support with that Greenbush pacing.
Questions?
I think you answered this in that, but I see a scenario where if this mask mandate were to get continued and the parent chooses to unenroll, like not Greenbush, just unenroll, are they still able to access services? Because last year we did the ready, willing, and able letter for anyone who unenrolled. But has that changed this year?
It really hasn't, although I will say I prefer having a conversation with each one of the parents that is contemplating that. I've usually happen in the parking lot when I happen to run into parents when they're doing pickup or drop off. And that happened several times at the beginning of the year because I like to be out near the schools and be there when the kids are being dropped off, because that's where the action happens. And in the conversation that I had with one parent who was he was livid. And his little guy, which I'm telling you, if there's a cuter kid, I don't know who it is. And I'm including my kids in that group. But this kid was just, and smiling to beat the band, but couldn't wear his mask to save his life. I mean, it was just not going to happen. He's in a life skills program. And, but I talked to the dad and I just said, listen, you can get the exemption. I mean, he fits the exemption rules, but if you want us, just bring the mask, make sure it's tied to his little button down shirt. He was wearing a button down shirt. Not kidding. But anyway, put the mask around his button and we'll make sure that he has that mask on as he walks down the hall to life skills room to receive his services. So I just think it's better to have those conversations with parents to make sure that we can keep them in school, because the kids are the ones that suffer when the decision's made to take them out. So, we still do the ready, willing, and able for parents who are insistent on homeschooling. Homeschooling doesn't work very well for the majority of our kids. I won't say it never works, but for the majority of our kids, it's detrimental and they lose ground, which is why our encouragement is always to do face-to-face. Case-by-case basis, we always consider.
So a question I have that's related to that, and I'm sure you're watching it, but you just described a scenario, and I've heard from many families the same thing. For them and their child on a case-by-case basis, that mask is not going to work for their particular learning situation. There's also a case happening there's a federal suit that's been initiated on the other end of that. It's a special education case that's going for the federal law component about the least restrictive environment, but also speaking to the health of the overall. So for kids who are severely immunocompromised, the fact that the premise of the lawsuit is it's not safe for my special education child to be here because everyone else is not masked.
So we have components of the federal law where special education is concerned being accessed from a legal standpoint from both ends. Obviously, that has not been concluded yet, but how do you see that? How does that work when you have you had parents reach out to you and say that that's your concern? So how do you handle that when that's the conversation that needs to be had?
The first case that we had this year with that was with a student who happened to have had a heart transplant. It happened a number of years ago, but Guardian is obviously still very, very protective of that situation. I recommended that we meet together as an IEP team and decide best how to address those needs. It's not just the one child in the home as a brother that obviously would be carrying germs back and forth, and the Guardian was worried that that was not going to be something that they could allow. So the third sibling in the house that goes to high school, and they're going to high school and they're just fine. So I didn't want to get into that argument, but anyways, so what we did was we did develop a compromise. The FAPE offering still remains at this school. We want to make sure that we're still on good legal footing, and whenever they're willing to come back, part of the PWN was that ready, willing, and able language. But in order to keep them connected to the curriculum, there are 2 teachers, because the kids are in different grade levels. Both of those resource teachers are communicating with the family on a 3 times a week basis for 20 to 30 minutes at a time. It is taxing on the teacher. It is outside of the realm of what we need to do, but in order to be the most beneficial to the kids that are involved, that we thought that was the best compromise. I don't necessarily think it's going to be as effective as face-to-face, and I continue to have conversations with that guardian on a weekly basis to encourage her to consider other options. And if she considers a homeschool curriculum option, we'll certainly support that to the extent that we can, but our encouragement obviously is to get her back face-to-face. Again, it has to happen on a case-by-case basis, and we make sure that our paperwork is in order to defend the position that whatever that IEP team or that individual child has decided to do.
Thank you for speaking to that, but because of the interconnected nature of special education, my high school teacher taught us very easy concept in government. Your rights end where somebody else's begins. That's it. That's how you figure stuff out. And then as I think about that and how to apply that in this case, that's part of this entire situation. That's part of what's been so hard. Because even within the umbrella of special education, you have some who say, the mask is not capped, it can't happen. I can't do it. I've tried, I can't do it. And that's valid and legitimate. You also have folks, even within special education, saying, I know the least restrictive environment is a thing, but I also understand that face-to-face is better. But if everybody's not in a mask, my child with a heart transplant, this doesn't work. I mean, so this is why it's so complex. So it's complex for the general education scenarios, but then the way special education, I've racked my brain. So thank you for speaking to the case-by-case nature of just how you have to do things. And
yeah, I don't want to say that we're put in these Sophie's Choice situations, because knock on wood, we haven't had that kind of a collision at this point.
Yeah.
That's an extreme example of what we've done to make sure that we're doing the best thing for the individual children that are involved. We're going to come up against situations where the parents truly believe that the best decision that they are making for their child is what has to happen. And the IEP team is going to disagree. We have to abide by what we think is in the best interest of the child. And that's what we're going to continue to do. And then when it comes down to it, we'll have that conversation. And when it comes down to the formal complaints, if we ever get one, which we haven't yet this year, not around the COVID issue. And so we're just making sure that we can legally defend any position that we have. But again, it's all done within the context of what's best for the child. I know that there have been folks to speak out about not having a separate classroom anymore, but that was an environment that we frankly just said, we cannot support your child in that environment simply because we don't believe their needs are going to be met there. It's not a qualified instructor. There's no point in providing special education support to curriculum that is not endorsed, because it's a multi-grade approach. Wasn't going to work. And so what was best in the best interest of that child is to say, services are going to be available in the classroom. So, and that happened on a couple of occasions. So
I would like to speak to that because I feel like just in the spirit of accountability, you know, principals were put in a really bad, less than 12-hour decision. And I would like to provide a little coverage for that, not because they need it, but because I just think it's, you know, when the mandate hit at 11 p.m. and by 8 a.m., here's what it is. There's a law component that administrators have to answer to, whether you like it or not. And so that next morning, when it's, you have people who are saying, I don't want to wear a mask, I'm not doing it. What I keep coming back to, here it is, 5 days a week, kids, all caps. And while people were understandably upset, I was upset when I got that email too. Segregation, what are you talking about? You know, I understand the reaction to that. But at the same time, that was a better alternative than, well, at least they get to stay at school versus being sent home. Because there have been, so be sure, I mean, there have been those kind of situations even for administrators, especially if you have school board members saying, don't suspend kids. They just found out about it. And did I make that call? I absolutely did, because give us a chance. They haven't even had a chance to talk with their teachers, let the teachers talk to the kids, for parents to talk with, what's Timmy, you know, Timmy, what's school going to be like? Do we even still want to hang and do this? There was no time for that. So then the principals are put in the position when they're getting, dude, don't suspend 8-year-olds, right? Well, if they're not suspending, and I fully admit that I said that because we had no opportunity to be reactive and I didn't want kids getting in trouble, you know, at school. So I said that. So what options are they left with? They don't want to send them, and they don't want to send kids home. Nobody wants to send kids home. So what are the options left? Okay, well, if they don't want to wear a mask and we're trying to respect that, we have this separate classroom. Do I understand from a parent's point of view that then they're in the separate classroom and what? And then now they can't get access to special, I mean, so that was things that needed to be worked out that would have been benefited with more time. But that is kind of some of that pinball machine stuff that the people who are showing up every day have been put in. And so the way that intersects then with special education too, it's helpful to understand, not just for people watching, but it's helpful to understand for me, because there's so many layers to all of this. So thank you for that. Any other questions or discussion?
I'd like to say one more thing. I've been accused of being a legal beagle, and without any consideration for anything else. And that's, I'll take some of that. I just think that I want to do things within the context of what the IDA sets forth, not because it's the law, but because it is student-centered. And that was the entire reason that it was developed in the first place in '75. So it's like, and I think I've been around since then. So that's in education. So that's something that I hold dear to my heart, but it's not because it's legal. It's because it's the right thing to do for kids. And so anytime that I hear someone complaining about that, it's not just like, oh, well, I always reach out to the parents, and I want to make sure that we make things clear to them what the rights are, first of all, and also why the decision was made the way that it was made, and what the center of that conversation was, because that's the most important thing for each one of these situations, is to keep the kid at the center of the conversation and to make sure that the outcome is one that is student-centered, student-focused.
Anything else to add to this discussion?
I will say it bleeds right into number 5. So it's a good segue, because our kids have a lot of social emotional concerns, and other tough meetings. I had a meeting today where I was faced with a 6'3" young man, 315 pounds, told me to do things that were anatomically impossible, I think. So I'm just gauging from the reaction on everybody's face that they were. So, but our kids' social emotional health is tremendously at risk, especially those in special education. And so we've had more issues this year with outbursts and fights and those kinds of things. So I welcome this discussion as well.
All right. Well, let's take on, and we have people here to help us with the social emotional part of this conversation. Additional people.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're ready.
All right, social emotion, no problem. Social and emotional considerations, number 5. Now, we're gonna mar the lines between 5, 6, 7, and 8. This is a conversation about some academics, but it's also about social emotional issues. We most certainly ask some people to be here to kind of be able to answer some questions about that and where we're going. So probably those next 4 may kind of run together as far as those things. So we did ask, I guess, who do I want to put pressure on first? But,
They're ready.
Sally. Sally is our representative, as she had said earlier, on RAP. She's in charge of the RAP workers in our buildings and elsewhere, I believe. And so I asked her if she could come and talk about some of the issues that that they are dealing with, some of the things that they're able to do in the schools. Because most certainly, social emotional issues, mental health issues for students in our district have been a concern. Most certainly our numbers went up on those kids that answered the question. I've been sad more than 2 weeks, and so that has been an issue. Most certainly, I believe that the school district has a good portion of that. But I also believe 110% are social emotional, and those kinds of things are a community. We all have to work together on those things in order to make those things better. So with that, Sally, I'll let you kind of start if there's a few things you'd like to start with for the board. And then most certainly Sydney and Jana that want to jump in, principals, Dan, so on.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Again, I'm Sally Ryan. I'm a program manager at Burt Nash. I just moved from our case manager, CBS services, community-based services, which we do have case managers in Baldwin City. And now I'm supervising the outpatient therapists and our RAP therapists who are not in Lawrence. So I have everybody else. So I do have a great co-leader that supervises the Lawrence people. What we kind of came together and envisioned our kind of mission and vision this year, Carla and I did, if you'll bear with me, just to kind of describe what RAP does and what our purpose is, was empowering students and families in the school community with intentional contributions, purposeful engagement, and creation of supportive connections. So all of that is to say that we want our RAP therapists who are Danielle and Chris. Chris is in the junior high and Danielle is in the high school, to fold into your community and be available to support in multiple ways. All of our RAP therapists are licensed therapists. Both of yours are social workers, so they're master level social workers. And so one of the advantages of having them connected to the community mental health center is kind of that clinical supervision and that clinical support that that we can provide. You guys are the experts in education. You got that down. We can help on that kind of like that other side of the clinical mental health side. Not to take away from the glorious work that you guys do, because I hear about, especially Sydney, I hear about you. But it's a different realm, right? It's a different environment and systems that we work within. So we had spoken about maybe bringing some data, and I have some data, but while I was running through our data tonight, I was looking at just from last year, just the entries that Chris and Danielle made on our kids who are RAP enrolled, because we will serve people who have signed up for RAP and people who have not signed up for RAP, right, in a little bit different capacity. But the kids who are wrap enrolled, and just the individual services, not any group services, not any school support services. And I had, sorry, I lost it now. I'm gonna tell you how many, maybe. We had over 2,000 entries. So every time we meet with a child, we enter it into our database system so that we can track and be responsible and accountable for our actions and being responsive. Some of the themes that I saw in those, again, just what we're running through for our wrap enrolled kids, support clinical consults for other educational team members, right? So we're working with teachers, case managers, principals, school psychs on strategies, keeping people updated on if there's something going on in mental health realm that's going to impact, a classroom performance or an academic performance, keeping people updated within the confines of confidentiality, working with parents, being a liaison. I saw a number of entries of like, mom called and asked if I could check on so-and-so today. So just being part of that team that helps that community. Following up on absenteeism was a huge thing for everybody, especially last year. You all know, so-and-so hasn't signed on for 3 days, or we signed on, we didn't actually see them. And so RAP and Burt Nash's other services as well really felt that as part of our mission for the last year. And then coordinating with services with other community providers. We don't only refer back to Burt Nash. Baldwin City doesn't have as many, alternatives as maybe Lawrence does, but we can connect with, so Danielle and Chris can help connect with Burt Nash services, with increased therapy, with med services, and help coordinate that. Or just tell parents, these are some different resources, these are some different options to support the well-being. So there's my spiel. A welcome question, because that would probably be easier than me just.
One question, because we were even kind of touching, Sydney and I were talking a little bit about this today. Can you talk more as to, you just mentioned connecting with outside agencies, like scenarios in which that's the case. And the reason I asked that is I feel like that's part of one of our hurdles is sometimes we need to make that connection, and then the parents don't do anything with it. So
Sure. I think I hear what you're saying. So
at what point or what would be like a scenario where you would, obviously seek an outside agency, I guess, like out of what the realm of maybe what Burt Nash does.
So things like, the services that we don't provide, just food. Are you getting harvesters? Are you getting how are we getting that taken care of? We might refer to maybe like our housing department to find out more about like, are you having trouble with utilities? And so we try and resource out. And then also as an agency, again, especially right now, especially this year, we're trying to find those to refer out to also. So it kind of just depends on what the need is, other than if it's outside of what we do at Burt Nash. One of the services that people find a little bit more convenient is the case management, and I don't think people understand like how much like what that is and how that can impact the community. So we might recommend for something like that. So that's a case manager will come to the home, take kiddo into the community, teach skills. So you're doing that live coaching on what is going on. I can see that you're anxious. This is what we do now. So, but there are also a couple other places that can help with that, especially if a kid doesn't qualify under ours. So we'll try and hook that family up with whoever else is appropriate. A lot of times we'll sign somebody up for something and
There are-
parents say, we can't.
There's some obstacles at times.
And transportation is a big one, right? We don't always want to have to go to Lawrence, and that's one of the reasons that we're trying to pull, you know, our case managers and some more stuff outside of Lawrence as well.
Like you, yeah. Well, I don't know if everyone kind of knows my role, I guess, at the high school. I did have a full year here at BHS before COVID kind of came in and changed the whole bunch. But I guess kind of what my biggest role is, right, is advocating for students. What do you need to be successful here at school? And that level of success looks different for every single kid. So everything is tailored individually for each student. This year, especially, we're seeing a lot of kids struggle. We're not having that traditional honeymoon period, right, where they're super excited to be back at school with their friends and life is great, and it's still summery outside. We're seeing more and more students having a hard time adjusting to every single day at school. Students that sadly aren't choosing in-school options because their anxiety is so bad, and there's not enough resources to go around to support them quickly enough. And we're doing the best that we can to get kids here every single day. But I mean, essentially, I've worked in other school districts. I've been in community mental health fields, even though maybe I don't look that old, for almost 10 years. And we do have something very, very special here in this community to support students and our families. So I just wanted to make that point as well. And our community Burton Nash rep worker is fantastic in supporting students. And we work very much as a team to support in a tier intervention, essentially, to support students at every single level to get them where they're here every single day. 5 days a week is exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about our mental health team. We want kids here every single day. Now I feel like I'm rambling, so maybe if people have questions for me.
I was going to say maybe, and I know we're talking specific to the high school, but things that you do in terms of, like you just mentioned, tiered, you know, what does tier 1 look like? What things that you've implemented, tier 2, tier 3? I mean, if you want to speak to that, that might help.
Yeah, so at a tier 1 level, this year we've started more of a continuous learning opportunity for all of our students during their seminar classes. We use Harbor's, the Harbor through Jostens to provide some emotional lessons, learning opportunities for students on empathy, drug and alcohol use, suicidality, all of those kinds of topics that are kind of hard to hear. I also go into health classes for our freshmen, and I talk with them about mental health and wellness and sex ed, which is always pretty fun. But all those kind of hard, tricky conversations that maybe aren't so easy to have at home. And then when we talk about tier 2, that's when I'm meeting with students more individually. I'm talking about students who are maybe categorized at risk. Maybe they're in our Bulldog Academy class because of gaps from remote learning or mental health struggles. And then when we're talking about tier 3, we're talking about students with like severe mental health concerns that are impacting their ability to be at school every single day. Traditionally, I kind of cover tier 1 and most of tier 2, and Danielle and I work together on a few students that are tier 2, and she handles more of the tier 3, but we're always consulting together as a team to support our students.
So maybe I'm summarizing this wrong, but it seems like we've got actually 3 layers of social workers or social work support in the district. We've got district social workers or district employed social workers who are providing that preventative and early intervention support. We've got Burton Nash providing some tier 2 and tier 3 level supports. But kids need to qualify for those in some, or not necessarily.
You might speak to more about how your care team or your mental health team refers to Danielle. But generally, it's kind of like the mental health team will say, hey, this kiddo, you know, the lunch groups isn't, it's not enough. We're still blowing up the lunch groups, so let's call in RAP. And so
Okay.
RAP will do individualized. So we'll do those situations like one-on-one, addressing more from the mental health. Maybe there's trauma, maybe there's anxiety that's causing that. So we help find the root and then work on those symptoms. But you might talk, I don't know how specifically the high school does your referrals.
And it's still something that we're developing. And when we had Danielle for about 3/4 of a year before COVID hit. So we were very much like working on how that referral system was going to look. But essentially it is, because we're such a small, school, we're able to really do it case by case. We've been working with a student, we've been doing X, Y, and Z as interventions. We feel like they need more support. Maybe they already have a case manager through Burt Nash. We think this would be a more appropriate placement. And Danielle's caseload is a little smaller than mine, so she's able to give more attention to those students because they deserve that more attention. They need that attention here at school.
Okay, so that's a good clarification. And then on top of all that, we still have social work services provided by the special education co-op as well for students with disabilities who have social, emotional, or behavioral needs on top of all that. So it sounds like this is a multi-layered cake we have here for supporting these the kids' needs here. And even with that support, we still have a gigantic level of need to support our kids. But I will say, from my experience working in education as well, I don't know any other schools that have this many layers. Whether they're working as they should, it's a matter of debate maybe, but that many layers, that many levels, or that many individuals who can support kids is incredible. I mean, from my perspective anyway. But so kudos to y'all for doing that work, and thank you for supporting our community that way too.
Well, and to Sydney's point, I mean, we need more.
Yeah.
I mean, I recognize that we were trying to work together with the social work team at each of the districts that we support to make sure that kids' needs were covered. There are some kids that rise to the level of it being a need as reflected on their IEP. And that was becoming problematic because that doesn't fit with the typical social work model or the RAP model in terms of being available for all students all the time. And therefore, we did go ahead and purchase with our COVID monies, the ESSER1 monies, or ESSER2 monies, we purchased a social worker for this year to split between Baldwin and Eudora, which is working so far, but it's not enough. I mean, we really could use one more social worker so that Baldwin can have a dedicated special education social worker and Eudora would have one as well.
Yeah, and Eudora is one of my other schools, and so yeah.
And the needs there.
Oh, yes. So our philosophy in RAP is not that there are children or students that we would not like just blanket, no. There are students who will be eligible for support through their IEP, and there are kids who are in not quite that level of need. So we don't actually qualify for additional IEP support, but tier 2 is not working. So this is RAP.
Okay.
And I know Chris is also working with your new school counselor on working out like kind of the same tier type of system.
We're driving them out. That's something we're working on developing at the junior high, so we have both of those positions now. Another unique piece about how we utilize our RAP worker is that Chris works a modified schedule for our building. So he comes in later in the mornings and stays later into the evenings. So he can be there until 5 or 5:30 in the evenings. And that's helped with some of our parents who said, well, I want to come in for services, but I'm not coming into your unmatched school, and there's no way. But this gives them that layer of, okay, we can meet with you after school. So that's been a good thing for us.
We do have the goal of having every building is unique. And so we work with that administrator. Your RAP therapist should be working with that administrator and hopefully including me in some of that conversation. But what does your building need? And junior high is going to be different than high school. Elementary is a whole other situation. But yeah, so we do try to tailor to those specific needs. But there is, I mean, the IEP minutes, yeah, you guys will never have enough social workers, who can do that, and just like, we wish we had 100 Sydneys too.
We can't keep adding social workers, like probably every year. Did I hear you say the tier 1 lessons are Harbor?
Yes.
I'm familiar with that. And when are those delivered, and are they delivered to every kid?
They are delivered to every student on Wednesdays now during our seminar because we have that modified schedule. So Wednesday seminar is about 45 minutes. So we're able to actually get a full lesson. And social emotional is once a month, and then IPS is about 2 times a month. And then we have some open time to be able to do other team sort of meetings.
Is the seminar teacher then delivering the lessons?
Yes, they are.
And are most seminar teachers, does that include almost all staff?
Mm-hmm. It includes
Junior
a
high
big
might be
chunk.
a little different. In the junior high, some of our lessons are taught by the seminar teachers. And then there are other times where our academic counselor will go in, and we use second step at the junior high. And there are days where they might go camp out in a core class for each grade level that week and present maybe a little bit more heavy hitting topic than maybe a typical seminar teacher might be asked to do.
Well, the reason I was asking was because when I was thinking about, we need more social workers, but how do we build capacity among tier 1?
I think one of the very good steps that we took as a district towards that goal is doing the mental health first aid. I think that got a lot of our staff talking about things that hadn't been on their radar before.
And I should say, our counseling department and social workers, I mean, they've put together everything on Canvas for teachers. So there's well, each class has a specific, course that they can go to. So teachers can access that, and they put basically all the instructions and links to everything that they might need on the Harbor, and built those into modules. And so that we can obviously go back and make those changes, keep what's good, get rid of what we didn't like, and then import that from year to year and tweak it. And so they've done a good job of building the instructions and trying to make it as easy for teachers as possible. So it's not another stressor that, hey, you can go in, everything's here, watch this, here are discussion questions, those sorts of things. So they've front loaded and put in a lot of work.
And for example, September being Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, it was a heavy topic that we're having on Wednesday. And we did, a staff meeting so we could go over some of those concerns. So teachers, I made sure they have my number. So if you're really nervous about having this in class, you need to let me know so I can come and help you have that conversation. Or if something is happening in your class, you can reach out to me so I can come up and grab a kid. It's just not feasible for me to be able to teach every single lesson.
Well, and it doesn't go fast. So I applaud what you guys are doing. Thank you. And I have another question, but maybe it's you. I don't know. And I didn't want to ask the one I just asked until I asked this one, but how are we supporting teachers and social emotional?
Can I interrupt? Before we do teachers, can we talk about social emotional health student-wise at the elementary level? Can we, and that way we're just still kind of in that student, and then can we transition to staff? Is that okay? Are you okay with it? Okay.
Yeah.
Just so we're kind of in that same, student mold. If you'd like to add how about working in your buildings?
We use second step, which is taught by the classroom teacher. We have a social worker in each one of our buildings. And at the primary center, the social worker does the bullying prevention unit and the child protection unit. And then what we've found this year is that we have a much greater social emotional need from kids. And our social worker has been spending almost every day with several of our students. And so we're not quite sure at this point how she will deliver those bullying prevention and child protection units or do the project-based learning project. Because she doesn't have time for that. It's from 7:30 in the morning until 3:30 in the afternoon. We're dealing with kids with social emotional difficulties.
And I would say that those are all the same things that we're dealing with. I think about 3 years ago, the primary center and intermediate center shared a social worker. So we had one person serving about 700 kids from ages 3 to 11. We do have one per building. You know, we're still looking at one social worker serving 300 kids. And as Deb said, you know, we didn't really know what to expect with our kids coming back from remote. I say Mrs. Bond spends most of her time with anxiety, is probably the biggest one. And then next to that would be those pre-suicidal type indicators, self-esteem. I don't feel like I belong here. I don't like myself. I hate being here. The things that lead up to the person saying, I'm gonna go hurt myself. I think she spends most of her time walking kids through that, talking to parents about that. And like the older kids, it's a lot of parent, social worker, teacher communication. That's probably, I mean, I don't get to see her much because she has always got a kid in her office. And so she used to be part of helping me problem solve with behavior issues, but now she's primarily is, I can't come out, I've got a kid I've got to talk to, I've got a parent I've got to call. So those have increased. I can't give you a number, but since last year, again, we've added more kids back in. Definitely has gone up. We do the second step as well. It's a school-wide initiative. We're on second week. That they have revamped that program out of feedback from across the country. They start off with they talked about how your brain works. It's a lot of executive functioning right now about setting goals and staying ahead of things and planning out what you're going to do. So they've taken the advice of teachers to help kind of revamp that in addition to the how do you show empathy, how do you show respect, how do you solve a problem, how do you control emotions. And our teachers do that, our classroom teachers do that. And then our social worker and myself were there for the tier 2 follow-ups. And then we have to rely on the support from other folks to do those tier 3, if we have to call in the behavior specialist, we have to call in someone from an outside agency to help with that.
I will put in a plug for second step. I just want to make sure that you guys understand, we start that at the preschool level. I mean, we start that in our early childhood programs because it's so important to give kids language to go along with the emotions that they're feeling younger and younger. We have more and more kids in our early childhood programs that have extensive social emotional needs. And that second step curriculum gives a good foundation for them to at least start that building process of being able to give verbiage to those complex emotions that our kids are feeling younger and younger. So.
We don't do the teacher transition, if that's okay.
So it's been a couple of years now. The social worker team, Mr. Dorothy and I have all participated with the Mental Health Technology and Transfer Center Network. Basically, it's a learning community for social workers. And we were part of the Douglas County group, which DACA organized, and then it was Baldwin, Lawrence, and Eudora were the schools that were part of this. 2 years ago, we focused on building our action plan, and that really helped us look at the tier 1, 2, and 3 supports that we needed, kind of this plan that's in place now, just to be able to provide the tier 1 supports out in the classrooms and have our teachers helping deliver those and those pieces there. And then last year, the focus was on supporting our teachers. So how do we support faculty and staff that are supporting students and taking care of them? And I think they give us a lot of ideas on what we can do to really reach out and support them in lots of different ways. I know the social workers then kind of ran with a lot of those ideas, supporting them in the classrooms last year, supporting them outside, offering like counseling times for them, different little check-ins that they would do. And then I'm assuming those are probably still continuing this year. We haven't really touched base on that this year yet. We're not part of the learning community because they haven't offered that up again. But probably the social workers will be continuing some of those check-ins with staff as just little surveys they put out, just different little things that, kind of keep a check on where our staff is at.
And I'd say the biggest feedback we've gotten from teachers is just like our students want, is they want to have that feeling of community here at school. They miss being able to laugh in the lunchroom and hang out after school and do all those things. And so something that we did last year during an in-service was, allow them to play a brain architecture game and to get into groups. And I was mean and I forced them to not sit with people from their department and play a game that taught them about social emotional learning for our students. And then they connected that with their own background and their own lives and their own experiences. And overwhelmingly, they said it was a good time to be able to sit and just talk. And do something that felt more normal. And that's something that we want to implement, of course, being focused around supporting our students, but allows teachers a little outlet to do something fun. I mean, our students don't want to sit and be lectured at all day long either, and neither do our teachers when we're talking about how do we support our students. And we're trying to give them a more creative way to learn that, how to support them better while supporting them as well.
And as part of that, I'm going to tap on what Sydney just said, with every evaluation of professional development or any of our collaboration days, we have a set of about 6 to 8 questions. And they're things that we would want to see in the classrooms, but we ask those of teachers because their professional development should also mirror what we want to see in the classroom. And one of the questions on there is, I feel like I belong in this community. And so we're always kind of keeping a tag on that one. Just do our teachers feel like this is where they belong and this is the education community that they should be in. So we want to make sure that this is it for them. And if not, we want to fix things. We want to make that better and make it so this is a place that they belong.
So on top of all that, we work with, I serve on 2 committees. There's a county superintendent group that meets to talk about behavioral health with DECA representatives. And we talk about a lot of things that we do as districts in that group. And then in the bigger group, we actually have Engage Douglas County, which is a behavioral health committee, which includes all districts in the county. And we work together and work on programs together. Kansas Communities That Care, we were the only school district in the county taking that information and utilizing that information that now is countywide, and all the school districts do it. So we can all compare notes on what our kids are seeing, what kinds of things they're facing, what are they upset with. So we're able to take that, and of course, that group, Engage Douglas County, is using that information to make their programs. Out of that, we've come up with different programs. The behavior game, which is being utilized at the PC with, remind me, it's 1st grade and 2nd grade.
School-wide.
School-wide now.
School-wide.
And the behavior game came from DECA that we put in, and then the other program that were
Sources of strength.
Sources of Strength, thank you. There's another program that we're putting together and implementing across the county. So most certainly we've been trying to address mental health issues as we believe across the district, the kids are not ready to learn. If they're dealing with mental health issues or social emotional issues, they're not ready to learn. So we've got to address those things across the district. As you know, as part of our ESSER 2 funds, we put in for an additional 2 social workers to go through there. We have been unable to get anybody to apply. So we don't have those, but.
I just got an application.
Oh, good.
I really did.
Oh,
So,
really?
yeah, I did.
So we still have that. Yeah. Those are still advertised. If we can get somebody in and get them started, we'll get them started. But we do have additional social workers that we're asking for. There are plenty of needs. You know, as Dan mentioned, it wasn't very many years ago, we were trying to do this with 2 social workers in the district and trying to get this all done. Most certainly, we've expanded that greatly. So that we can address all these things. And most certainly, we're working with lots of outside groups to help us. Headquarters has helped us greatly with suicide information, working with Burt Nash on mental health first aid. All of our staff has been through that, from every bus driver to every teacher to every administrator. We've gone through that, including myself, on the things that you should do and not do when trying to work with kids that may be considering suicide or thinking about that. And so we've done a lot of things in the last 2 or 3 years to expand those programs. I know with Harbors this year, high school, we got that tier 1 thing going for high school kids that we maybe didn't have as much of prior. So that's been a really good thing.
Jana, in one of your reports, and I threw it out as a mention last week, like, here's all the stuff we want to talk about. Okay. The second step being digital. So when kids are at home, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it is a stream service. So if they are at home, the teacher could deliver it, but then that gets into remote learning. So we're not really.
So you can't really, okay.
Darn. Yeah.
But they can't, so they can't access it on their own?
I don't.
They can access, so the lessons are usually video based, but without the teacher component, you're watching a video that has no context.
Okay.
So you'd have to have the teacher there zooming in to tell you about it, which goes
Shoot,
into
I was
that.
really excited about that because if anything, when you're at home, I mean, I know there's been all sorts of feelings about the mask, but the piece, the psychological piece also that we don't spend as much time on, not because we don't know it. It's the isolation. It's the being away. It's not having your normal, that has played such a big role. And so let's keep brainstorming. Surely there's a workaround, because when you get that social emotional piece that is consistent.
We may be able to find some other videos or lessons or something that they
that
can put
doesn't
into like a Google Classroom or a Seesaw to be able to access and get.
Not
some-
to add, but if they're, because we're limited on the rules from the Kansas Department of Education about the number of hours of remote learning, shoot, I didn't think about second step falling into that. Okay, that makes sense, but okay.
We'll keep working.
But we can keep working on it. Because that connection piece, while they might be at home for whatever reason.
Yeah, I think originally we thought we could post a video link there, but since it's connected to the teacher's ID, then the students would have to log into it to.
Okay. All right. On that same note, kind of involves parents too. Sorry, Chad, sorry.
Two questions. Are we limited just to social work on ESSER funds? Because a big need that I see potentially is missing at the ICPC would be elementary counselors. That would take some of the load off of the social workers. Don't know how they feel about that. I'm just thinking outside the box. And then in previous districts, whether it was any type of therapy or whatever, when we were running short of physical therapy, we used contract agencies. I know we had to pay a little bit more, but when the need wasn't being met, we had to meet the need. And if they weren't going to apply to us because they could work in private practice or whatever, we still had to meet that need. Would ESSER funds cover that as far as social work if we had to contract through an agency? Because that's why they're not coming to us, is because they can be in private practice. And
contract social work.
I don't know of any availability there. We've always hired our own. We try not to contract out. It just creates a system of inequity. But I know that as we're looking to expand our social work options, I think we would look to try to hire first. I did have a couple of good candidates. I didn't realize you guys were looking at 2 good candidates when we did choose the one that we did, and could have easily convinced her to come up as well. So I know that it's a timing thing. But I don't even know. Typically when I get calls for contracted help, they're generally around the psychologist, speech language group. I don't see too many social workers on that list. Sure, they're there, but
Would counseling be an option through ESSER funds in order to take the load off of the social workers? I guess
It's possible. Yeah, it could qualify. It has to tie somehow to COVID of some kind. Anything that comes through the ESSER has to tie to COVID somehow.
And I just didn't want to move on before because I just have one more thing. So I heard perspective surveys and I heard the CTC, and I'm glad to hear that you're using data to really leverage that view of if what we're doing is working. Because right now we are escalating the kid, not we, kids have a lot of needs right now, and it's important that we meet that. I'm just wondering how we're measuring if Harbor is working or if our extra social workers are working. Just think it's important to kind of leverage that data to be able to tie back to what we're doing. And you also have the Sabers and My Sabers, right, which will be another data piece, hopefully, right? So,
Yes.
yeah.
So we'll be able to look at some of that data and just be able to, see, are these things working? I know Second Step has an evaluation at the end. They have unit evaluations and unit tests.
They've added in unit projects that do evaluations.
Projects.
That do an evaluation of the unit and then the end of the year. So you don't have to wait until May to figure out if it was effective or not.
And we have previous year's data on that actually too. So to do the Second Step assessments, we can look at that. We can use the Kansas Community Sick Care Survey and look at if, as we're implementing this program, because this will be the first full year for the Harbor. And it's got a rocky start last year and tried, but this first full year of that, so you can be able to look at that, and then also the counselor and social worker at the junior high, how they're implementing the Second Step lessons. Because Second Step digital is also new for the junior high. So then 6 to 8. 10 and 12 take the Kansas Community Sick Care Survey. So we'll have some longitudinal data on that.
Yeah.
But we'll have to figure out what these actual benchmarks are, because that's part of our ESSER reporting. So we'll have to have that.
Yeah.
So for REP, we use the pediatric symptoms checklist. And last year was our first year of implementing that, but so they'll do that at the beginning of the year, middle of the year, and end of the year to make sure that we're having some assessment of where that's going. We also, with the Zero Suicide initiatives, we will be doing more Columbias and PHQ-9s, which are assessments of depression and suicide risk or suicidality, mostly in the moment, but we can track a little bit like across months, 3 months, 6 months. So we have a couple of measures in there.
But that's not given to all kids, right?
No, that's just, well, yeah, that's during a REP session.
Gotcha.
A question about the first mental health first aid. There were several classes that were offered. I know a lot of people here took advantage of that. Is there any, because all this with social emotional health, I mean, it works best when parents are in partnership with the school. So while we have to do our job on our end, I'm going to say anything that maybe I'm not supposed to say. Our kiddos are coming to school with with high ACEs. I mean, and that's why there's been so much emphasis on trauma-informed care. And we have to meet that where it is. But we also, to do that effectively, we have to be in partnership with families. And the mental health, the first aid mental health thing was such an awesome community outreach. It was highly attended. Has there been any discussion about that happening again? At some point?
We actually stopped because of COVID.
Right.
I think our last class was maybe in February before COVID hit.
Yes, that's
We
right.
had one scheduled in April and had to cancel that.
That's right.
So we've kind of been taking a break, but we still have additional funds to contract with Burt Nash to continue that training. And we did have several like Saturday classes scheduled, so we could have parents and community members there, and several have signed up for that. So yes, we'd like to get that
Because the more of
started
us that are in
again.
the community, volunteer coaches, volunteer board members, whatever it is, the more people because I took the class and it was, I mean, I have counseling training and I'm a parent and I learned a ton. It wasn't like, yeah, I already know all that. It wasn't like that. I mean, it was
it was really informative, and the more people that can be in partnership with that.
I took the class too. It was really good. And I would advocate that anybody do it that possibly could, although I missed the second part because it got canceled. Because I think of COVID. So did that one ever happen again? Or
It
is
did
that,
not.
yeah,
We need to catch you up.
gotta catch me up.
Just saying personally from the high school on a personal note, I will say there's been some, situations where, one of my children has been worried about someone and never had any hesitation about being able to contact you. So I just really, knowing that you're available. So as we talk about, supporting students, staff, and families, kind of bring that all together. And I'd like to have like a separate conversation academically. But for that social emotional piece, one of the big points of emphasis over the past 5-year KISA accreditation process is this district identified the R's, or the 2 R's, and one of those was relationships. And I know this has been a tough time for students, families, and staff. And I know that there's been a lot of people upset about a lot of things, but I don't want things to get lost that there's also been so much good. Has it been perfect? Are there things that we can do better? We address those meaningfully, yes, but I'm not okay with a narrative that says our teachers and staff have not been up at all hours for our kids, because they have. And whatever comes, we'll face it. But it's best when we can do that with parents in cooperation and be receptive to feedback, even if it's not good. That's okay. That makes us better. But we are very, very lucky in this district that we have so many staff that don't just do it because it's their job, but are here in spite of the things that have been going on, because of how deeply and genuinely they care about our students. And so for social emotional health, we continue to work on the things we need to work on, but also communicate to folks that we're here for them and that we can get through hard stuff together. That's going to be important for everyone involved, because nobody wants anything but to see these kids thrive. And maybe we have differences about how that happens, but I've appreciated this discussion tonight, because understanding how the pieces converge, how things overlap, is not something that maybe everybody always knows when they come at it with their own specific angle. And it is all one big team that is wanting to keep kids here 5 days a week, healthy, happy, and learning. So unless someone has something else to add for the social emotional piece, and you might, I would like us to take some time to talk about the academic support forms of support, because there are many of those that also are socially, emotionally beneficial, but we're in the business of educating. So I want to make sure that I have a list of things that I hope that come up, but if not, I'll ask about them. So unless somebody else has something else to add, I'd like to go to the academic piece of that. So let's talk about why we decided to do project-based learning district-wide, specifically in response to what we've been through over the last 18 months. Jana and Mr. Dorothy, if you could talk about that, that would be great.
So project-based learning, and we missed this presentation at the last board meeting, so we get kind of a brief version of it now without visuals or anything.
Right.
It's more than just projects. It's a different instructional strategy. So it's introducing ideas and concepts without actually just standing up and lecturing about it. And so students learn within the context of the actual project. So it's more real world based. There are a lot of soft skills that come out of that. So such as our communication, collaboration, creativity, and critical thinking. Those are the 4 C's that are part of our 21st century skills that we want kids to have. So all of those are just built into the project. It is more engaging for students. The other piece is if we do have students that are quarantining, it supports that because they can do that outside the class. They can continue those studies. They're given different roles and different responsibilities that they can continue to work on if they're not in person in the building. So it still continues that learning. It is more engaging because it's authentic for kids. It's how we work in real life. We don't go and do math at one time, then we turn and read our book and we go and do this. We don't compartmentalize everything. It's just all blended together. And so that's the benefit of having all that together. Let's see.
That's good. I just
Is
wanted to
that-
touch, I know that, because I know you're going to make a formal presentation at the next meeting, but
Well,
I just wanted to talk about why that's
part
a
of
district-wide.
project-based learning. Part of the reason that we jumped into that is most certainly it's one of the strategies that is recommended by the Kansas State Department of Education to improve and move the needle on your state assessment scores, and to be able to put those kids over the top, which has been a challenge to get kids to move along. So it's a strategy that is successful in doing that. Some school districts have jumped in full-fledged with that, or their whole schools. This past year, Olathe started an elementary school that is all project-based learning. In fact, Chuck James' wife is the principal of the building, and she went out and hired away one of our teachers to come over there, and they do project-based learning the whole day. Epic Grade School in Missouri is considered one of the top scoring schools in the state. Now, they are selective about the kids that get into the program, so you have to remember that. That makes a difference. But their whole day is project-based learning with some direct instruction, but they do project-based learning. The kids are involved. Every kid has their own tablet, and they're doing those project-based learning. So most certainly the reason we've jumped into it and the reason we're pushing for that is because we're wanting to get more 2s to 3s on state assessments. And this is one of the strategies that's research-based to try and get that done. So that's the reason for the push.
When we talk about Fast Bridge too, you just send an awesome email out. Can you talk about that just a little bit, how that will help us identify where the kids are along the way as they're doing the PL stuff?
Okay, so before we go into that, we know there's learning loss from our kids from last year. There's also unintended learning. And there were a lot of things that happened over this past year that we didn't plan on, and kids are coming back with just amazing stories and things. I mean, we had elementary students that took different vacations and they were still doing the remote learning at the time, going to Yellowstone and still calling in and meeting with their teacher. I mean, kids got really good experiences and really good things that happened along with the learning loss that we know. And we know kids are all over the board. So as we go into this year, we're using FastBridge now instead of MAP. And the idea is that we're going to meet them where they are and we're going to take them where they need to be. So that's just, we can't account for whatever happened or did not happen last year, but here's where we're at. This is what we've got. This is where we need to go. And so planning more individualized, personalized instruction is going to meet the needs for all of our students. So FastBridge is our new tool. This is it's now part of a state contract, so we'll be able to get cheaper prices on it in the coming years. It does our math, ELA, or reading assessment, and then also SABRS, which SABRS is, you have to help me on this one, social, academic, emotional, behavior.
Rating scale.
Rating scale. Is that it? Okay, so that's it. Basically, it replaced SDQ, which was our strengths and difficulties questionnaire that we were using before. But this is computerized. So teachers will enter their scores on the computer. Students grades 3 through 12 are doing their own assessment online. It's like for students, it's a 20-question survey that they answer. And then I believe that the IC, we're also having teachers rate that as well. So we'll have 2 data points at the IC, but they rate themselves, and then it comes into, I think it's 3 domains. Thank you. Social, emotional, and what's the other? Academic. So into those 3 domains, and then that information can be fed to the social workers and counselors who can then decide different support groups. So that part's going to speed up that process a lot too, because they were having to hand score everything before they could start working with kids and getting the different support groups set up. On the academic side of that, the math and reading assessments, Fastbridge meets the dyslexia requirements for KSDE. So that was one of the reasons why we went that route. We had 2 teachers start today with their assessment. So the window just opened today and they said, we want to do it first thing. Teacher feedback on it was pretty easy because they didn't have to do any setup in the background. Before with MAP, they had to assign the right tests to kids and do a lot of stuff there. We have Fastbridge going through Clever, so all the rostering is done in the background. So if they're put into Power School in their class, then the next day they're automatically in that class in Fastbridge. So we could instantly do the testing. The little bit confusing part for me, trying to figure out how to set all this up, students just log in and they go to Fast Track Reading and it gives them the test they're supposed to have. So it just automatically assigns it for your grade level. Here's what you need to do. It was pretty seamless today. I watched 6th graders and 7th graders and students logged in. They took an automaticity, so a fluency type reading test that was 4 minutes long and then it instantly went into more of a comprehension test. So they didn't even know they were taking 2 tests. It just switched on them and that was it. So, and then teachers had results instantly. This will help us as we look through and see where students are at, see which students need just additional tier 2 support, which may just be some strategies and ideas to use in the classroom, in the regular classroom, or tier 3 support, which would be more of a pull out and get you more intensive support to try to get you back on track and get you at grade level where you should be. So that's.
What do parents get out of Fastbridge?
And what?
What do parents get out of Fastbridge?
What do parents
Get out of it.
get out of Fastbridge?
Yeah. What do parents get out of it?
They get a report that shows whether students are academically performing. Is that what I'm? Is that the right answer? Yeah, so they will get a report similar to math.
So it helps parents
Yes.
understand where they're at. Not only us,
Yes.
we know what to do, but
Right.
parents
Yes.
say, oh, here's where we stand. So.
Yes. And the piece we've been missing with some type of tool like this is the progress monitoring and the interventions. So before, if kids were struggling, the teachers kind of had to come up with their own interventions and they may or may not have progress monitored. It's kind of a fuzzy area because we're in the middle of doing all of this and it's hard to be reflective and come up with all these ideas. And Fastbridge will actually give us suggestions for what the intervention should be and say students scored at this level. So these are some things you should try. And then this is how you should progress monitor to see if they're actually making progress. Because I think of it like a medical community. So if the doctor gives you an antibiotic, then they want to check and make sure that's working. And if that's not working, then we need to go back and get a different antibiotic and keep trying something until it works. We don't want teachers to spend 2 months doing something. And if that's not the right strategy, then we've just wasted 2 months' time. So we'll be able to do more frequent check-ins to see if what we're trying students is actually working and making a difference and moving them ahead. Yes, and the reports will come at the end of the testing period. Once that closes, then we get norms for the school, which is also the grade level. So grade level, the school, the district, which will still be all of us, and the national norms. And the national norms are in there now once the test window closes and you have some comparison data to see, am I really on track with this or not? So as soon as that closes and teachers will be able to send out those reports to kids.
Those last 3 are really like this. So if anybody has something else to add, to ask, to mention, to put forward for further thought.
I'll just chime in one little piece. Some of what Jana was sharing made me start thinking about our student success teachers that we have. And I really like the piece in Fastbridge that's going to give you the idea of what interventions to do. Jen and I were talking about that today. MAP gave you some ideas of where you might look, but Fastbridge gives you more content to actually kind of look at. So I think that'll be really good. And also along that same line, I don't know what they're doing necessarily in other buildings, but I know in our building, it's been nice that that teacher is able to go right now into classrooms and is already saying, oh, hey, in 6th grade, I'm going to do a mini lesson on this topic. And on 7th grade, we're going to do this topic. So it's been a really nice asset to have that we have not had. And that takes, you're asking, what are we doing for teachers? Well, that position alone has taken a lot of that reteaching off of those teachers to a certain degree. And I think that's easy to overlook and maybe it's a little undervalued sometimes, but it is a big deal for us.
What else?
Another program that we started using last year, and it's still a work in progress, is ION. And this is a tool that we asked for years because we had MAP tests and Ames web tests and DIBELS tests and state assessment scores. And if you're wanting teachers to use data, you've got a table full of papers and you've got to look at this one and this one and this one. And we came across this product called ION that is a dashboard that you can import all that stuff into and get a total profile of a student. You can also add behavior referrals. We started adding in the social emotional data, but now we have FastBridge will take care of that. So when you're looking at what does this child need as far as intervention, you've got the spectrum from social emotional all the way academic. You have all your data pieces in one place. And so your teachers can go in and build, they call them data walls. You can look, tell me the number of boys who scored at level 4 on Tuesdays after a full moon. I mean, you can go well down into the weeds on what you want to know about kids and your class. And that's powerful for being able to do intervention. So that's another tool. It's worth mentioning that takes some of that data mining and gathering off the teacher's hands and puts it in and log in, and there it is. Got some bugs still, but we're working on it.
Yeah, and ION's more of the data warehouse, and FastBridge is more of the assessment system. I did ask, I haven't heard back from them yet, if ION would pull in the FastBridge data. So it may, because it pulled in the map data, it just had a connector, so we pull that in, so we still have one spot that we can look at everything at. FastBridge will not pull in other data, so.
But if ION would talk to FastBridge, then you would truly have everything all in one.
And ION is now working with Greenbush, and they're setting up some dashboards that are district-wide dashboards, like to monitor the dyslexia pieces and progress, different assessments they have out there. And one teacher today commented, the 2 teachers that tested today, one teacher commented that she thought that FastBridge was very targeted in the assessment, and it is, because it's figured out like what 30 items kids need to know to be successful and what's going to identify the achievement rate. So it's only 30 questions, and they can predict if you're going to actually be achieving on grade level at the end of the year or not. So, which also helps because kids were not testing at the end of class, and it wasn't going over into 2 days. It was one instructional day that they used for testing. So that was really nice from a teacher and instructional standpoint, that we're not losing a whole bunch of days just to find out where kids are at.
Well, and the other thing we have to remember that teachers are going through is that if they've had, some of the students were, depending on what age they were attending 5 days a week last year. Some students were attending every other day, and some students were fully remote. And now you put 3 different subsets of learning styles back into one room for one teacher. And they had varying levels of success within those 3 kind of, learning modalities the way they were last year. Now they have all, mix them all together, we're all back in a room. And then there's even a larger or a wider range, not larger, but a wider range than what there even typically is for a teacher to be able to understand how to meet all the needs of the students. So having that seems like that would be extremely helpful to be able to meet the kids where they really are, because where they are is much more varied than it was 18 months ago, even with the spectrum that's available within that. So
and I think ultimately, and maybe the PCNIC do this, but ultimately when they have the system set up, so interventions are set up with like skilled, like needs of students, and you can take a grade level or grade band and put them all with a teacher or an adult support person, so that the teacher they're doing the core instructions that all kids need, but then they're sharing the load. The system works, so they're sharing the load on the intervention. And I think the IC and the PC do that with reading. Is that right? Somewhat?
We did in 2019.
Right, got it.
And cohort groups.
And we hope to this year.
Right.
We just haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah, it takes time.
Part of support for families is the feeling of connectedness that families have with the district. What did our back to school nights look like? What was the participation like? I'd like to hear from each of the buildings about how that was.
We had lots of people.
Mm-hmm. Good turnout?
Yeah, I don't have a percentage, but it was.
No, I'm not trying to
It
ask
was,
for-
it was almost everybody.
Yeah?
Yeah. And I think there was a lot of of appreciation for having it in person and being able to go and
Mhm.
see a classroom and know that it's happening,
Yeah.
starting.
Yeah. Adults have been re-experiencing that, object permanence thing. Is it really true? Is it really there even when I'm not looking? I mean, yeah.
What about the junior high?
Yeah, we had great attendance. In fact, we had to split it into 2 sessions just to get everybody into the PAC. So, great turnout.
Good. What about the high school?
We were at about 25%, which I've never been able to answer the question. I mean, you tell me we have near 100% at the IC and the PC. We have, but at what point does it become not important to get into the building and visit with teachers and have conversations? I mean, I constantly hear about, well, I can go online and therefore, I mean, I'm still holding on. It's one of our KISA goals, but a glimmer of hope getting parents into the buildings for student-led conferences. And I think, it's just another changing that the idea that it's a traditional conference versus it's no longer that. But I've never, I mean, shoot, when the time rolls around to get, time slots for my wife, I mean, we got to get on there and get them, and then we've tried to do stuff like that. And we got to as high as about almost 50%. I mean, we were at 17%, 25% when I was teaching. But even then I'm thinking, man,
Are you guys
that's
doing
not good enough.
student-led conferences?
We are, and it's ever evolving. And I think, and I don't want to, I mean, obviously the past 18 months have thrown a wrench in some of those things. So yeah, we are,
Yeah.
I don't know if
Well,
anybody
that's-
ever has it.
That's the part of the partnership piece, is that I was hoping there would have been more parents at the high school back to school night, because it was so informative, and
It would have answered a lot of the questions that I've heard at board meetings, to be honest. And so how do we encourage, I'm not, but it's like, oh, come, the thing that you're upset about or you're worried about, that literally came up 4 times over the night. So how can we be, and it's not about finger pointing, but how can we be more invitational to get, what is it that is, are there barriers that we're not aware of? How can we, because that's all that matters. The other stuff doesn't matter. What matters is the more involvement and partnership there is between the parents and the school, the better it will always be for the kids. And so just something for us to keep thinking about, because there was no question, and I know you don't have numbers with you, but I do remember the percentage went up, I want to say between 29 and 33% when you guys switched to the student-led conferences at the high school. I might be wrong about that, but it seems like it was under 20 and then it went to 50. I mean, it did go up. There was an improvement. And just building that back so that parents know, hey, this is a place. I mean, because it is a place you can come. You can come and talk about anything you want to. And it manifests differently when you have little ones with their backpacks and their cubbies in high school. You got it. You can figure it out. But it's more important than ever that parents are in partnership.
I think that's the hardest thing with the older they get, with how connected they are. Shoot, I work in the building and Holly still feels guilty when she doesn't come, because she's like, she just feels obligated, because you're one of those parents that wants to be connected, but when you ask your kids, is there anything that you need me to go listen to, and they say, no, I'm good, and we can get online and we can see those things, and it appears that they're good, and we don't hear anything on the other side. It does. I mean, everybody's burning it at both ends. You barely can get here by 6:30, even if you start it later, and you got everything else going on, because the older you get, the more involved they are. I mean, some of it's just conflicts of too many
Other
things in a
things.
night. I think when you look at the high school and junior high.
And this is just it's a random thought, but with the issues that we deal with at the high school level because it's different. And then obviously some of the topics that people are talking about. I mean, here you had opportunities to come in and we even set it up. We deviated from what we normally did so that we had an open time of 30 minutes at the end, which we normally don't, so that you could just go around and
Whatever you needed to.
yeah, and talk. And for the most part, Dr. Breckeisen and I stayed down here and visited with people, but we gave people that opportunity. And it didn't have to be about those topics, but just going in and meeting these people and so forth and having conversations, right? We're getting away from seeking first for understanding. And I think that's part of the issue. That was a random.
Well, it's not random because it all goes back to those relationships and trusting, trust of who's working with my kids and what's going on. And those are legitimate concerns. How can we be responsive to that? Again, not getting into the weeds about should it be happening, should it not be happening? I don't care. I don't care who's right. I don't care who's wrong. I just care about what works. And I know everybody sitting at the table feels the same way because we've had all those conversations. But how can we just continue to be willing to be nimble, be willing to be creative, so that it is a thing that's best for kids. And so
I think that you just got to continue to be creative, and that's the word. I mean, with the individual plan of study and potentially linking that to an enrollment conference versus just an academic conference, things that you can do at the high school level, which I've done in other districts when I've been in, it can really increase that. And the only way the enrollment happens is if that kid truly shares, this is my individual plan of study. This is the direction. Here are the classes that align in the Baldwin School District or a tech school or wherever we're at. And then the parent has to sign off on that with that meeting, potentially with their seminar teacher, whoever's doing that enrollment process. And very few parents got out of, I'm just too busy to come. Like we pretty much we're pushing over 90% participation in Amigo when I was there because it was part of your next year enrollment process.
you get into your class until you.
Yeah. And it also cut down on schedule changes because it was a big thing that, during our conference last year, this is why. This was the why behind this academic path. And it helped our counselors, it helped everybody along the way as far as their academic trajectory. So there's different ways.
To Chad's point, a lot of things we've historically done, especially at the elementary level, with family engagement, are not currently available, like the going eat lunch with your child, walking them back to the classroom, volunteering at the school. A lot of those doors are rightfully closed right now to protect and keep us in school for 5 days, right? And so I think to Chad's point about being creative and thinking outside the box here about how can we have more outside events or more activity through the PTO, for instance, to get parents more involved in that. I think parents are extremely hungry to be involved with their kids' lives and be connected to staff, be connected to what's going on in the school. But we've closed a lot of those doors because of COVID mitigation strategies at this point.
But we have a responsibility, just like we've asked the kids at every step along the way, and they've demonstrated it brilliantly, and I would contend far better than the adults in their lives. But we have to pivot too. We have to find, that's what we used to do to engage folks, but now this is what we need to do. This is how we might be able to think about and do this differently. So that parents do feel in partnership because they are shut out from, for understandable reasons, from some of the normal things that would have been ways of engaging.
Kelly, it feels like maybe an appropriate time to mention, we got what I thought was a very thoughtful message today from some parents who got together and talked about a lot of issues. It doesn't really rise to board action, but there are a couple offers of volunteerism at the end of that. And I don't want that to get lost in the shuffle. So Paul, I don't know how much time you had to look at that, but there were some offers in there that we might want to keep in mind.
We also have district site council that will be coming up after the finish of there's lots of ways. There's individual school site councils. ways of just reminding people, in addition to the ways that they're offering that don't fit into those things that are pre-existing. Let's keep thinking about that. And Zoom, is, even though we can't do it in the way as far as teaching goes, as far as meeting with parents who might be working the night shift and can't come to the evening back to school thing. I mean, I remember there was one night I was working and my girls we met with Dr. Yu in my car, as most of my meetings are, you guys know. But, I mean, I went outside from work and got in my car and got on a Zoom call with Dr. Yu, and I wouldn't have been able, to do that. And we weren't even in his class. It was just, he took the initiative because we wanted to speak with him about some stuff, and our teachers are willing to do that. And so I think we can use Zoom in some of those ways that are different, that make sense at the building level individually without, micromanaging any of that, but just inviting further thought.
Kelly, one other thing on the topic of supporting families, we talked about getting parents into the school building in particular and getting involved that way. I'm also curious to know how we're connecting families to not just resources that we have as a school, but also in our larger community. Like you mentioned, some of the Burt Nash connections that you guys have. I'm kind of curious if we maybe go around and talk to each building about how you're broadcasting these available resources. Because I can tell you there's a whole lot of families in our community who are hurting for food, hurting for housing, having a lot of stress in their lives as well. They can most certainly access some of those resources that we can't provide as a school, but we have partners in the community that can pull that off. But can we speak into that a little bit about what some particular buildings are doing to help support those additional needs, or maybe Burt Nash itself to kind of help connect folks?
So just a reminder on one thing on that, Chris, on our website, certainly Megan went through and created this whole resource with links to every one of those organizations, not only in Douglas County, but in Franklin County and nearby, that are organizations that parents can take advantage of. But it's listed right on our website. They can go there and see all those different.
Not on that note, I think that would be an excellent email to come from administration to say, reminder, these resources are for you in the community at large to access. I think a lot of people have forgotten that's there. I'll put that.
I know those went out last year, as I remember them, but in the brain fog that was for all of us, like, people were, a lot of information gets flushed because it's not immediately.
Yes.
Yeah.
Unless those people are seeking out those resources, sometimes they just don't hear it, right? So I know in our building that generally when I hear chatter of somebody needing help, it's one of the few people I go straight to. My Burt Nash rep Chris is a fantastic resource that we've used a lot. Other times it's calling Mr. Dorothy. I just called the other day. We were trying to find an avenue for a parent to get legal support for low-income families, and we were able to point them in the right direction. So I don't know if it's at any one point in time, it's just one person, but it's anybody and everybody that I can think of. Just give them a call and get help.
I know we using those traditional communication methods, you sometimes don't reach the people that need it. And so we rely a lot on our social worker takes most of the responsibility for that. She's got a pretty good handle on the families that we know have need. And then we communicate with some of the local churches who will keep us apprised on, hey, just so you know, there's a family in need, and vice versa with those other folks in town that kind of have their finger on the pulse of what families need. So it's not really a formal communication because, again, you do it in the formal ways. You don't always reach the people that you're looking for.
I think it's really important we're being mindful of engaging families and not just informing families too. So when we think of it in that mind frame, to engage them as much as possible. And I mean, they need information also, but I know that's what we're all talking about here, but I mean, just.
That's a really good way to sum it up, though. I mean, that's what we're talking about. Anything else specifically on support for staff? Other than be nice to them.
everybody.
bringing them cookies because they're,
I mean, you and I, we talked about it a little bit at volleyball. And I think, you know, Dr. Harvey, you brought it up at the last board meeting and it finally needed to be said. I mean, I don't know, over the past 18 months, we've become the bad guys. And I don't know how that's happened. You know, people will stand up at board meetings and they'll talk about all the great teachers they've had, you know, but then yet I can tell you teachers don't really feel, they don't believe when you say that. And I don't know where that disconnect has come, but if we want to support staff, we really have to get back. I don't know how, to them feeling like they're not the enemy. That's the only way that I can put it. I mean, it's, and I quote you, it's like, we did the best with what we knew last year. Would we do some things different? Yes. There's no doubt we would do things different. All teachers did what was best under the circumstances, and things have changed and we're still trying to do what's best. But I just think it gets lost in everything that's going on. And I don't have a great answer to that other than it was a start to say, you know, when the mask mandate comes down, don't take it out on these people. You know, I think that was the start. And I think it was important hearing it from somebody, you know, and I don't know. I can't emphasize enough. It's like nobody here. I mean, all the board members, I mean, you're not getting paid to be here. Teachers, we can argue we're not making enough. When people say we're not there to help kids, I'm like, contrary to what some people believe, I'm like, come on, we are. I promise you, we're all trying to pay it forward so that if I use my own example, when I have my 4 kids, I want somebody to do to them what I think we're trying to do now in our building. People need to believe that. They need to hear it. Like, our goals have never changed.
well, I'm with Phil. Get mad at the board. Don't get mad at the people that are trying to work. I mean, I don't like when people are mad at me either, but I would rather that than staff be, you know, mistreated. And I know there are a lot of people that are really trying to be supportive, but our staff, I've seen some social media posts, I'm gonna be honest, from staff that I never thought I would see, who are at such a, I mean, it's early in the year to have that level of, and I don't know, maybe I shouldn't be talking about this, but I'm just going to, because it's important that we listen to everyone and not disparage and not discount just because of the manner in which, and I really believe this, and I know there are folks that disagree with me on that, but just because maybe the manner in which it's being delivered is not preferable, it doesn't mean that there's not something there that doesn't need to be addressed, you know, genuinely listened to and heard. And that's hard when you're getting slammed. It is hard, but it's also our responsibility and we have to keep doing it. And they might be right about something, even if, you know, you don't care for the manner in which they're going about it, doesn't automatically make them wrong. And what if you miss out on the best idea just because your collar was up? And that's hard to do, but I hope that we can keep leading in that way. But at the same time, we have to protect our staff in this, who are already exhausted very early in the year. And I have to say, I know they're going to do it, but I'm also really worried about faces that I see in this room and faces that I've seen every day at different places. Posts that I've seen made that are from otherwise very quiet people. They're like, I don't know how much more I can do this. I mean, that's troubling to me. And so while I do not want to discount the legitimate concerns, it's our job to address those. And we want to, but also we can't take it out on the staff who are simply trying to do their job. And so to whatever effect we can lift that, whether it's the level of discourse, whether it's the level of how we treat each other, and have empathy, even if we disagree. We have to provide that room for our staff, because it's too early in the year to see the bags under eyes that I'm seeing, and I'm not just talking about my own reflection. I see it on people. You can see it in their countenance, in their spirits, and that is not why anybody got into education. And we can do this. Go to an activity, see the kids, go be around kids, and they are like, what do I got to do? I just want to be here. So I really appreciate that you guys are all hanging in, and we are going to get through it. If there's something more that we can do, I hope that this is not, I mean, I think work sessions are productive. So not in lieu of, but if that's something that needs to happen once a semester or something as a format, I don't know. I'll leave that to Mr. Dorothy, but I do think it's nice to be able to talk with each other in that way and not, and know and be prepared that that's the kind of session it's going to be, rather than we're having our normal business meeting and all of a sudden we're like, yo, so-and-so, what do you have to say about that? That can be a little disconcerting. So just thank you all for everything that you're doing. The one thing I said to staff at the breakfast when Mr. Dorothy and Jana invited me was, believe it or not, I kept it short and sweet. I know that's shocking. But I did say, you know, kids often learn more from us the way we respond to when things go wrong than when everything goes right. And we have the opportunity every day. If I didn't believe that, I already would have been like, peace out, I'm going to Missouri. I mean, you know, because it's exhausting and I'm tired too, right? But they are watching, and we can do it. And we have to keep telling each other, reminding each other that we can do it, because there's going to be days when each of us are going to question, even though, and I think precisely because we thought we were through it, and now it feels, I think that's part of what's going on with families and kids. It's one thing to be like, hey, we're persevering. This is this new novel thing, and we're pivoting, we're adjusting. And the people thought we're through it, and to feel like we're going backwards, I think that has hit people really, really hard. Which is why we have to be even more patient. End of rant. Does anyone have anything else they would like to add?
Great rant.
Thanks.
The last thing I'd like to say is, I know we invited a lot of people here. You have put in a number of hours to be here and help the board. It's critical that the board gets a chance to hear from you guys from time to time. So very much thank you for being here. I know we're late, but I appreciate everybody coming and spending the time, because this was extremely important for the board to be able to hear these things from you guys. So thank you all for being here.
Motion for adjournment.
I move that we adjourn.
Second. All those in favor, please say aye, raise your right hand.